right, so thank you all for joining us from all over the country. Uh, I'm just going to quickly introduce who my brother is, and he's going to get to talk about himself. But I invited my brother to talk with us because he does this research as his living. He is a full-time philosopher studying race and culture, and he writes articles for the Huffington Post, the Daily Beast, Daily Dot, and he's had interviews with different news organizations all over the world. So this is his life. So that is why I've invited him. And he is not a dancer, but he has supported me dancing all my life. So he has some insight, but we will need help later on directing this to things specifically to the dance community. But just to get this started, just thoughts I had on this year that like this is definitely not how I expected 2020. I don't think that anyone expected 2020 to be this. But it's interesting that I thought of 2020 as the year of seeing clearly because 2020 vision. And so it seems like it's definitely manifesting itself because then this year America is having to face itself, and right now it's not liking what it's seeing, and it's an honest picture rather than the facade that we've been creating for ourselves and for the world, and so we can't lie to ourselves anymore. So anyways, my brother is going to share some of his research, and the first thing I was hoping you would talk about, Barrett, well, there are a couple things.
All right.
First, do you have your research on ethnocide? But I was also wondering if you could like jump into the concept that you have for your book, which is talking about being in the second redemption, and explain. I know, I remember stuff. Um, and so please explain to people the concept of redemption and how that is with our history and what you saw with it now. So, like, my brother kind of predicts things, and this is one of the things that he saw coming. So, Barrett, if you would please.
Yeah, sure. So good question. So the topic of ethnocide and redemption are like interwoven. Um, Basically, I have been writing opinion columns for about 5 years. Just like apparently, I have an opinion that people like to hear, and so I get to write it. And around 2015, I wrote this piece that said that Donald Trump was a fascist. It was like the first piece, like really in like a mainstream publication that said Trump was a fascist. You can look it up. It's Daily Beast. It's called "Okay, this Trump thing isn't funny anymore." I can find it and put it in the chat at some point too. And so I thought Trump was a fascist, but not because I thought he seemed European, but because saying that you need to beat up Mexicans and then like his supporters go beating up Mexicans. It's about like as textbook fascism as you can get. But then on top of it, the notion was that Americans weren't like overly concerned about like a fascist being president. It was more like this guy's a joke and his fascist rhetoric won't manifest into anything. And so what ended up happening is I compared how the treatment of black people in like the Civil War and Reconstruction in 1800s was all like similar structures. Like a white politician would say, "Hey, we're gonna go like murder and beat up black people," and then they do it. But we don't call that fascism. We just call that just America. So the idea was that we don't view fascism as fascism in America because that's just like what we've done forever, and we don't know how to articulate it and explain it. And so the first pass I had at trying to articulate this to people was this idea of reconstruction was and a thing I call the American cycle. My book talks a bit about this. My book got more structured towards ethnocide, but how it works is I broke the US into four phases. There's the founding era, then there is the Then there's the founding era, and then there's a second era, which is the abolitionist era, and then there is Reconstruction, and then Redemption. But this is where it gets weird. So the founding era is the era where we are like super racist and oppress Black people, minorities, systematically, legally, and it's just like, but we have a facade of being really pristine and democratic. So our founding fathers, they're all slave owners, and we look at that, we're instructed to look back at that time as if it's like a great time with all these really smart people with the best ideas, and the stuff they created is like holy documents. But you know, they own people, and they really, objectively speaking, like aren't good people, but we're indoctrinated to think that they are. So eventually America recognizes that oppressing, you know, about 30% of their population and denying their humanity is just not that great of a thing. And then abolitionist movements happen. So in the 1800s, there was an abolitionist movement, and the Republican Party came out of that. The argument of sustaining dehumanization is a hard one to win. And so over time, the abolitionist movement gets bigger, bigger, bigger. And then there's a clash, and then that clash results in the era of Reconstruction, where America tries to experiment at making an equitable society. And so Reconstruction was 12 years, but there was only really 8 good years. The first 4 years, with President Andrew Johnson basically sided with all the Southern plantation elite and slave owners and gave them, you know, amnesty and all sorts of stuff. So I know this is a history lesson, but it'll make sense. It'll show why this is predictive. So Reconstruction lasted for 8 years, and then from 1877 to the beginning of the 20th century, there's this era of redemption. But the redemption was the Southern, like, racist plantation owners, former slave owners, former Confederates, trying to redeem the South by make the South how it was before the Civil War. So this policy that lasted from 1877 to the beginning of Jim Crow was to make the South great again. And so once that happened, they spent all this time, and then we wake up and it's Jim Crow. And Jim Crow is the same dynamic as the founding of America. Like, white people in the South treat Black people as property. They own them. Black people trying to flee the South for the North. Back then, in the 1800s, it was the Underground Railroad. In the 20th century, it was the Great Migration, where Black people went to Chicago and New York and Los Angeles and all these other places to escape the terror of the South. And then the next phase, an abolitionist movement slowly builds. The narrative of being able to sustain the oppression of, you know, 30% of your population is not really viable. And so second abolitionist movement happens, which is the Civil Rights era. And we had the Civil Rights era, and that continued. And this is where, like, historians and I disagree, but like, I'm pretty confident I'm right, is that the thing about the abolitionist era back then and today is that if you were a slave, what they had to give you was humanity. You know, like, it was just like you were not a person, now you're a person. But since America had given Black people humanity, to take their humanity away, America had to institute various systems to make them not able to exercise their humanity. So voting rights, housing rights, employment rights, all stuff. It wasn't like a one thing. It was like 30 different things that you had to systematically approach to give Black people humanity that was taken away in Jim Crow after we won it in the 1800s. And so, like, this abolitionist movement lasted from the Civil Rights era all the way to Obama, because you have to start incrementally doing all the various things. You have to fix education reform, you have to fix criminal justice reform, you have to fix everything that was structured to take away Black people's humanity. It's a long process, that takes a long time. But Barack Obama was the culmination of that progression, where America felt they could have a Black person in charge. That is the equivalent of Reconstruction 2.0. Now, this is where the predictive part came in. So I did all this research, found all this stuff. What ends up happening after Reconstruction is the era of redemption. And so when Donald Trump started saying, "Make America Great Again," my brain was like, these are the redeemers. This is the redeemer coming back. And how the redeemers, the redeemers also weren't like an official political party. It was a combination of business and political elites, property owners, people who made their money off of owning people and property and having like transactional relationships with the world. Donald Trump is a landowner. He is a guy who focuses on business and exploiting people and owning property to get wealth. Also, he's not good with finances, and that's another thing for these plantation elite. Like if your livelihood is based on the labor of people that you own, you don't have to be good at stuff financially. You just have to make sure that you have enough people alive that can continue to make money for you. So like, for example, Thomas Jefferson died largely in debt, massively in debt, and he could live an opulent lifestyle in debt so long as he owned hundreds of people that could always pay back the loans he had taken out. And then once he's dead, he's like, someone else is going to go buy my people, and that's how I'll repay back all that debt I have. And that's just like how the plantation elite could live. Donald Trump is a person who is horrible with money, but the capacity of him to like own stuff and exploit people makes people believe he should get loans. And so Donald Trump is a plantation elite, and the rhetoric from the Republican Party was all like textbook redeemer rhetoric. And so in 2016, I was writing pieces saying how Donald Trump could win by following the pathway that the redeemers did in 1876, 1877. America really wasn't like interested in listening to me. No one thought Donald Trump could win. And the pathway, I will grant it, was slim, but it was pretty clear. What you end up having to do is you suppress black voters, which Republicans did by gutting the Voting Rights Act. Also, since there wasn't a black candidate that was able to really run, that's going to like not excite black voters as much. And then what you have to do is appeal to these white swing voters who don't consider themselves racist, but they really like their lives more when racism allowed them to have better jobs. Like when they didn't have to compete for employment with Mexicans or African Americans, and they felt that they could just get a job whenever they wanted to, they liked that life. And when they would talk to Donald Trump, they would say, keep my factory open. Like, just think of the scope of that. Like if a black person asked for some sort of financial assistance, just like free school lunch or food stamps or just Medicaid, basic stuff, America acts as though this is some outrageous burden because black people are lazy. But white people will really vote for a president by saying, I'll vote for you if you promise to keep my entire job. Like the whole thing, I don't care if it's financially responsible or whatnot, you strike a deal with Mexico or China to keep the factory open and I'll vote for you. Like that is just like an outrageous ask, but that's just the norm. But that's how Donald Trump won. He appealed to these swing voters who, whether they consider themselves racist or not, really liked the lifestyle they had when racism gave it to them. And so that was his pathway. That's how he won Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, appealing to these people and suppressing the black vote. Real simple. And so a lot of my book touches upon this, which I call the American cycle. And the danger of what's happening right now is we're witnessing a second era of American redemption in the negative sense, where they're literally going around and taking away rights of people and viewing people not as citizens, but more as subjects of, a quasi monarch who is like, a president who aspires to be a monarch, which if you think of monarchies, people weren't citizens. They were subjects of kings and their life and their rights could be taken away at the whim of a king, no matter what. So that's the American cycle. That's the idea of like reconstruction and redemption. That's a big part of my work. But after doing that work, people didn't get it. They couldn't understand what I was talking about. They didn't want to think about it. So I figured I had to start coming up with like something that resonated a bit more, and that was the word ethnocide. My sister has a question for me.
I just want to add in that during the original Reconstruction period, I'm not sure how many of y'all know, but African Americans were holding office. Like they were getting political power, and they, especially in the American South, there's like, we outnumber people by a lot. So if we team together, then we can vote and get things the way that we want them.
Yeah.
And so that's when the oppressors really started going in panic mode, because they're just like, gosh dang, we're about to lose everything. And
Yep.
like they had businesses, they had houses, like you can find photos of affluent Black Americans. And so
So let
yeah,
me just jump
like
in real quick. What like everything my sister's saying is on point. It's super correct. A key thing to remember about the South is like we don't talk about how many Black people were in the South. Like the South in most of these states was about 50-50 Black and white. Like states like Alabama and Mississippi would be close to like 60-40 Black to white, but Georgia would be 50-50. Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina would be closer to like 40-60 Black to white. But we're talking about oppressing half of your population and keeping them in, subjugating them for centuries. So when the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment were passed and the first Voting Rights Act were passed, we're talking literally enfranchising 50% of the population. So back then, the rhetoric from the Republican Party was that demographics were key, very similar to the rhetoric of like the progressive Democrats, where it's like, it's of course we're going to be in charge. We have the Black vote, we have the Latino vote, we have the numbers. It's inevitable that we'll do it. It's this natural progression. That's what they said back then, because just if you think about it, like the Civil War, like the South fought in the Civil War, a lot of these white people died. Like they woke up and it was no longer a 50-50 split. Like they were the minority in the South, and people from the North were moving into the South to help build schools and all sorts of institutions to make it like a civil and not a barbarous society. And so the whole narrative back then was the South is just going to be like progressive, or we're going to fix it. All these Black voters, it's all going to da-da-da-da. They did not anticipate, which is crazy, they did not anticipate the South to create the Ku Klux Klan and do all the stuff that they did to like suppress the Black vote and win back control of the South in basically like less than a decade. But so I'm going to talk about ethnocide real quick, and then we can get to like more current stuff, because I'm talking a lot about the 1800s, which is very important right now, but like it's the 1800s. Perfect, good. I saw a thumbs up. So ethnocide is the word that I came up with to help explain race in the U.S. And the purpose of it, and that word means the killing of culture while keeping the people. The word was invented in 1944 by Raphael Lemkin, who invented the word genocide. And so Lemkin was a Jewish immigrant to the U.S. who made the word genocide to help create a new word to articulate the horrors that were befalling his people by the Nazis. So it's a crazy thing to think about, but before 1944, the word genocide did not exist on the earth. Like it didn't exist. And so he made this word, and then it became law. And now we've been combating genocide for the last 60 some odd years. So he also made ethnocide. He thought the words were going to be interchangeable, but they diverged over time. And instead of genocide, which is you kill the people and the culture dies with it, ethnocide is you kill the culture and the people, you kill the culture and the people remain. And over the last decade or so, they've used this to talk about like indigenous communities who have tried, like colonization has tried to wipe out their culture and indoctrinate them with English or Spanish or whatever like the European culture, dominating culture is. But at my work at the Sustainable Culture Lab, we apply ethnocide to the transatlantic slave trade. The goal of the transatlantic slave trade was to extract African culture from African people in its entirety, so that there can be a mass of cultureless people that can be the foundation of a chattel slavery system that will be the foundation of the societies that people make in the Americas. And like that is just what America did. Like just the South in of itself, like the cities are where they are because that would be the greatest place to harvest cotton or whatever. Like these cities are here and the towns are structured to sustain ethnocidal division, you know? Like they built the railroad tracks because of that. Like the amount of cities that aren't on waterways in the South is outrageous because they're plantation based. And so this word ethnocide makes it so that we're having a discussion about the culture of a society and not the race of a society. When we talk about someone's race, race is fixed. You can't become a different race while you're alive, but you can have different culture. You can cultivate a culture that is equitable and not one that's based on exploitation and dominance and ignorance like ethnocide. And so I feel this word ethnocide not only succinctly articulates like the founding fabric of our society and how it manifests to this day, but it empowers people who feel kind of trapped and helpless within like the racial box that they're in, want to be able and feel that they can become allies in countering this ethnocidal oppression that harms everybody, regardless of your skin color. Like your skin color, clearly you get disproportionately harmed depending on what your skin color is, but it's definitely not beneficial to anybody.
So yeah, that is the foundation of America, to divide people from their culture so that they're more malleable, and like we can fit you in this one classification more comfortably. And Barrett's right, it doesn't just happen to African Americans, but it's been happening to us for generations. But seriously, any culture where it's like, in order for you to fit in, you need to forget about your family history. That's a toxic thing. Like, this is a toxic way of living, to say that you need to divorce yourself from the substantive essence of culture in order for like no one to pick on you, or for you to get more, just to like erase a part of yourself. That's a very damaging thing. um I'm not sure if anyone has any questions so far, or want to like chip in with any experiences, or plow into like dance and
I see a
this.
question. So, yeah, so I can answer this one. Was it similar to the schools where they sent Native Americans? Yeah, 100%. Like the big school in Pennsylvania. The name's escaping me, but in Canada they had a whole thing recently where they acknowledged the Carlisle School. Perfect. Thank you, Gary from Chicago. So the Carlisle School was the slogan. The Carlisle School was "Kill the savage, make the man," I believe. And the premise of that was they're going to get Indian people and forcefully beat out their Indian and Native American culture to turn them into, white-ish people, even though they couldn't look white. And this is cultural destruction. Without that is ethnocide. And so ethnocide is not something that is exclusive to the African American experience. It's something that colonizers have been doing to all the cultures that they've interacted with, and it actually derives from a very a European philosophical outlook that we're all familiar with, which is from Rene Descartes, the Cartesian perspective, which is I think, therefore I am. And this seems really innocuous, but what ends up happening is if you determine your existence based on your capacity to think, that also empowers people to project that other people don't think. And if you can look at the other part of the world and say that they're the unthinking world because they're different or look different or act different, then you now empower yourself to dehumanize them. So this Cartesian perspective, and it also, if thinking is what makes you a person, you've kind of intellectually distanced yourself from the land, which is a big problem because your environment shapes you dramatically. And so this Cartesian perspective influenced Europeans for a long time, and it encouraged them to view non-Europeans as subhuman, decultured people that Europeans then had an obligation, like it was like the white man's burden of civilizing the world. And so this ethnocidal approach has been flipped and articulated for a long time as giving the world civilization, when it's actually the inverse. And so this ethnocidal action that's been engaged on Europe, on indigenous people, incredibly tragic and profound. The key thing for my work and the discussion about America and race today is to make sure that this ethnocide discussion is extended to African Americans, because what we I have a question about. Okay, cool. So appropriation versus ethnocide. It's a good
Oh,
question.
Barrett, before we go on to that, I was going to add on to the ethnocide concept. uh, because like one of the dangerous things is that like the people are saying I'm civilizing the world, but then they're also just like the goal is to be like me, which is like a European, but you're never gonna get there.
Yeah. And
Just keep on trying. You're trying for perfection, but you're never gonna get it because we're never going to accept you. But being who you are is never going to be good enough either. So just try to be like me.
yeah, the term in the US for this pertaining to African Americans is uplift suasion. It's like persuasion, but without the PER. And that was a narrative that if African Americans like civilized themselves, like if we went to the finest schools and dressed properly and worked hard and had successful businesses and made enough money to live around white people, then we would elevate ourselves out of racism. And these are theories that Black people have attempted for like a long time, but you always have the story where there's like a rich Black man in a white neighborhood, and then the cops like attack him because they think he's breaking into his own house or something like that, or their kid is not. Their kid's just walking down the street, and the cops don't see that Black kid and go, "Oh, that Black kid's actually a rich white person Black kid," and they beat him up, and they go, "Oh man, this theory doesn't work," and the theory would never work. But like this is like an approach that Black people have been encouraged to take forever. And a lot of the frustration with this, like with George Floyd and everything, like I think there's a lot of the tipping points for George Floyd. It's like it touches on a lot of stuff, but a big thing I believe is that he's friends with the former professional basketball player, and he looks just like Steven Jackson. So like it really hits home that like you could be 1 degree away from a successful African American who has a TV show, who played in the NBA, that a lot of people that like sports like him, and you still could like get killed by the cops any day of the week. So it completely decimates this uplift suasion idea that America has propagated for ages. So I'll go to the appropriation question. So like, okay. So I'm going to preface the answer with like a little bit on ethnocide. So if you acknowledge that ethnocide is a thing that exists, well, the society in which you live is all power dynamics. And so if it's all power dynamics, what happens is that words don't mean anything. What matters is that the person that you decide has value, their words have meaning. And so language gets totally corrupted in this ethnocidal space. And when you think about the US, our language is already corrupted. Like Donald Trump is the best example, but this has happened for ages where a politician will say something and it will be quite bad. And he'll have like his PR team or whatever, and they'll come out and they'll spin it. And they'll tell you like the next day, by the way, what he said, and you heard what he said, he didn't mean to say that. What he meant to say is what I'm telling you today, which is way better than what he said yesterday. And now you have an obligation to believe what I'm telling you he said, as opposed to what you heard him say. Yes, it's doublespeak. It's very Orwellian, and we live in a place where like 2 + 2 = 5 has been the norm for ages, and we just don't think about it at all. And so what ends up happening is if you live in this area where like your language is like completely corrupted, the words you come up with that to describe the flaws, they're gonna like naturally have like a lot of flaws in them unless you start coming up with a language that's completely disconnected to your society. And so like appropriation is a word that exists under the premise that like Europeans being on this continent isn't just appropriation. Like the idea of cultural appropriation as like a facet or like some sort of diversion from like what America does is just a fallacy. Like America is just appropriation. We just don't think about it. Like the other day we had Memorial Day, and no one really knows that Memorial Day was made by Black people. Like Black people made Memorial Day in celebration of the end of the Civil War. And now we can't have a celebration in America that's based around Black people celebrating their freedom. So we have to change it and appropriate it into something for white people that celebrates the military as a whole, you know? the Statue of Liberty was also something that was initially a gift to celebrate the end of Civil War and America coming out of the barbarism of slavery. Now the Statue of Liberty is something that's here to welcome immigrants. And these are the stories that we've been told forever, and we just think that they're not appropriating and changing stuff and like just like systemic propaganda. Like, we're from Marietta, right north of us is Cherokee County. There aren't Cherokees there, but like we use the name Cherokee County for a place that white people live in. Like that's just appropriation. So like appropriation is an appropriate word, but we use it as if it's like some sort of aberration and not just like the founding ideal of the entire like civilization. I think ethnocide, like I think appropriation is encompassed within ethnocide, but ethnocide speaks to like you can really start the discussion about ethnocide at the beginning of like the transatlantic slave trade, and I think the fact that like the word side, which means murder, is in the word makes people more aware of the severity. Like appropriation can be some more like general, lighter term that you can work with. It's not it's not necessarily something that you're gonna go to jail for. But ethnocide, just that's bad. Okay, let's see. Barrett, do you think this ethnocide concept also ties to the message of promoting America as a melting pot versus an actual multiculturalism society? So I don't know what you mean by ties to it. Like ties to it in like a negative way or a positive way. Like I don't know what ties means.
When you're talking about America as a melting pot, are you referring to like everything just kind of falling apart? There's no individual structure, it just all blends instead of having there be texture, like as in like obvious cultures or like people just making themselves kind of homogenous. Is that what you mean?
So the narrative of like a melting pot or like America being multicultural is like it comes from a false foundation. Like this is pretty harsh, but like if you live in a country for an extended period of time, your culture that you had in a previous one is clearly going to mix with the new one. Like you're not going to be able to like generationally sustain yourself as being Chinese or German or whatever, and it not become something new. So the idea of just like being multicultural without it mixing and meshing into like a collective identity is just not a thing that's possible. But I think America really promotes the idea of that happening because they don't want to have a collective culture because, nothing against like European people per se or white people per se, but like it's a skin complexion that's very hard to sustain in a world where the majority of the people on the planet are darker than you. And so like if you are around, if you like move to a continent filled with people that are browner than Europeans, and then you import millions of people that are darker than those people, the idea of equitably mixing with those people is going to be perceived as like an existential death. Like you will lose your identity as a European. And so then you create a narrative where like, we'll be a multicultural where like white people live here harmoniously and black people are here. And then immigrants come and and we just all live disconnected in the same thing as like a mosaic or something. Nah, it's just like not going to happen. And if you look at like a lot of Latin American countries, these countries, as people mixed with Spanish, and like the Spanish, it's actually kind of funny. When the Spanish conquered the Americas, they brought like battleships, like they brought soldiers. And once those soldiers got done killing indigenous people, they were like, well, we're bored. Let's go talk to some indigenous women and just see what we can do. And really quickly, there became like a new batch of people that were created, like had never existed on the planet, that were like Spanish and indigenous people. And from that point on, a new type of brown emerged on the planet Earth that had never happened before. And we just like neglect that this is a thing that's happened. But like when English people moved to the continent, they brought their families. So like they could spend a day going out like killing indigenous people and oppressing black people, and then they'll just go back and hang out with their wife and kids and act like nothing happened and there wasn't a mixing. And you could create this narrative of like, oh yeah, look, black people get to be over there. We just beat them up forever, and we'll move the indigenous people to Oklahoma, and then I'll just go and hang out with my family and be like a nice guy. And like that's just barbaric, and that's just like what America's done forever. And so a big thing about the melting pot is like America loves the idea of being a melting pot, but they don't ever say what happens, what you call it when it's melted together. Like I've had this conversation with my sister for like a while. It'd be like if you went to a fondue restaurant and they just called it melted cheese, but they didn't give it a name. Like who would go eat or think anything was desirable if you're like, I'm gonna go to this restaurant and what do they do? It's melted cheese. It's called hot cheese in a pot. Stupid. Nobody would do it. You give it a name, you give it a culture, and then it becomes like a real tangible thing. But like America doesn't do that, because if you give a culture of like a collective American people, it just, due to like this complexion of people on the planet Earth, it's very hard for those people to look European, and equality would equate to like an undermining of white dominance in the continent. So you have to create all these like false, illegitimate narratives and just like project them as if your life depends on it, when it's really just like your comfort in a particular skin complexion that you've decided is better than other skin complexions. And it's just like a joke. Okay, more questions came in. Okay, maybe they're saying that it is a spin, to excuse ethnocide. It is a spin.
Oh, so that's going back to the America as a melting pot question. There's like, oh, maybe there's like, we're a melting pot, but we're erasing your culture and keeping your body. Thanks for your work. So
Yeah.
there's that. And then someone was asking
Current
if,
events.
what?
There's a current events one.
Yeah, but there was one that also touched really quickly on whether or not that Spanish thing happened in North America, maybe on like the West Coast, do you know?
Uh, well, like the west coast of North America was Mexico, so like clearly that happened. But like it's hard to get to the west coast of America without going through Mexico. So like Mexico just had that whole area. So yeah, in the other part of America, clearly Cuba. I mean, clearly sorry, Florida. And then like in Louisiana was a big trade port, but that was like a mixture of like French, Spanish, every type of European, Black, and Indigenous person was in Louisiana. So it was like a whole mix of everything. But no, I'll go to current events real quick, because that's the point of this. This is why everyone's freaking out. So George Floyd, and I dropped this article that I wrote in the chat, and I'll put it again because like the chat's filling up a little bit. But so George Floyd, I view the George Floyd's death and his murder, it's all ethnocide. Because what is frustrating African Americans and what's befuddling American society is essentially like we don't have the language to describe like the atrocity that we do in this country all the time, and it makes people feel powerless and as if they can't solve it. And everything is harder to solve when you don't diagnose the problem. And George Floyd, and so a key component of ethnocide and the destruction of culture while keeping their bodies is dehumanizing people. But like, you're not going to dehumanize them to wipe them off the face of the earth. You'll dehumanize them so that they know their place, that their place is in the lower jobs. Just like when COVID was happening, coincidentally, all the essential workers, the ones who had filled the jobs that society couldn't exist without, all Black and brown people. Those are the jobs that had no value, but we couldn't live without them. The jobs that had less value that we could live without, those paid way more, and white people, by and large, were able to like work from home, go to like their remote vacation home and work from there. And so it's very much, COVID is a manifestation of ethnocide, and clearly within the Black community, as we are suffering more deaths and trauma from COVID, that exacerbates everything. That makes everybody a bit more on edge. We're facing literally an existential crisis, and we have an administration that doesn't seem to care and is actually instituting policies that make it harder for us to live as we're disproportionately dying due to systemic ethnocidal oppression. You then throw that on top of it where you have George Floyd, whose like dying words, utterances were the same words that Eric Garner said in New York. And so I think for a lot of Americans, we kind of like, we felt like, I didn't, but like a lot of Americans felt that like Black Lives Matter had moved to like maybe it was in the back burner. We had, not progress, but it made it easier to forget about it because there's so many other stressors and whatnot in our society. And to hear him say the exact same thing as Eric Garner hit home with everyone that like nothing's changed. It's the exact same thing. Like the end result's the same thing. The actions of the cop are the same thing. The pleading from the Black man are the same thing. And you throw that on top of it, he's friends with a celebrity, and we're like in the middle of COVID. And I think cumulatively, that was like the tipping point for a lot of white Americans. I think for like Black Americans, we're kind of exhausted. Like we know this is the deal, and we're just kind of hoping that there's some way that like white people will get what we're saying to the same degree and like really commit themselves to being allies. And it's intriguing to find out, like to see like what is that tipping point for white people. I think the cumulative impact of everything, the data, you throw in Donald Trump being just clearly like a racist individual, it put everyone over the edge. And now we're having conversations and we're seeing riots where like white people are in it. Like the discussion of like, should it be more or less white people, or are like are the white people like being beneficial? Those questions are important, but the fact that there are that many white people in it makes it different. And it also makes the narrative of we are justified with killing people to save property harder to articulate. Because I don't think, yeah.
Can I ask a question? Because you're getting pretty far down and we've missed a couple things in here.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you first started talking about current events, and hey guys, if you don't know me, I'm Felicia Jackson, been in the scene for about 12 years, on and off, used to be on, I'm married a dancer, and we promptly stopped dancing. Don't let it happen to you people, don't let it happen. Anyway, at the beginning when you were talking, you talked about how the people who were working, who became essential for our economy, who became essential to keep us safe so that we could order Instacart and so that we could, some of us actually even get our gas filled by gas trucks that come to our house so that we could have our homes cleaned and things sanitized. Question about that. You mentioned, those people make less than us, but then the people who were really, essential because they were really important, they were able to work from home. Could that be because we have more education? I'm one of those. I'm so grateful, right? I think I'm working from home for the rest of the year. I'm very grateful for that. Is it because we have more education? Is it because it's our right? Talk to me about that. Because what I hear back, and I spend a lot of time with whites and Blacks together and separately, is that, they didn't put in what I put in. They didn't go to 4 years of college. They didn't get their master's degree. They don't have $80,000 of student loan debt. That's the kind of job that you get when you don't have that. Talk about how the past is the current.
Yeah, America creates this weird narrative where your humanity gets given to you based on the amount of effort someone else perceives that you're putting forth. Like, if you live in a democratic society, a place that like believes in human rights, and you get rights based on existing, then the discussion of how much work you put into something will be clearly a secondary conversation. Like, and I've always found this to be like a weird response. Like, I bet there's plenty of us in high school that were really good at school and didn't have to put that much work in. And there's somebody else that puts in a whole bunch of work in school and they might not get a better grade. Like, depending, like, putting someone's worth based on how much work you perceive they're putting is like, it's an argument that's based on the power dynamics, how much authority you give somebody's voice, and not just like the power you give to someone's just innate humanity. And so clearly some people are going to have jobs based on like the education that they have. But like the education that I have is partially based on me being good at stuff, but it's largely based on my parents being able to live in a particular area that had a certain caliber of schools that I could go to. Like there's a lot of people that are very, very smart, and due to our system devaluing their humanity, they aren't going to get the educational opportunities that are afforded to them that they should get in a civil, equitable society. So yeah, maybe some of us worked harder than someone, but like you can't even allocate what hard is. And if you're using hard as like a barometer for someone getting like essential services during like a pandemic and the opportunity for them to be safe, then you're justifying having bad ideas that are detrimental to like people's life. And that's just like not something we should want to spend much time thinking about.
Can I add in? I want to add in a story and then add in another question.
Oh, before you
sorry.
get in that, can I just say something else? To add on to what Barrett was saying, like this is going into systemic racism, like just one of the core things with the systemic racism in our country, because the question is, how do we fund our education system? It's based on tax dollars, and it's tax dollars taken at a regional level. And like city levels, because they have city schools and they have county schools. And so how much they afford to pay their teachers, to draw in good talent, to get supplies for the students, to have a nice building, all that stuff is based upon the income of that area. And so if you have an area that is full of people who make less, then you're going to have schools that can afford to do less for children. And so like that's a part of our broken system, because why are you saying that this child is worth more than this child? Why aren't we taking the tax money and saying, hey, this is how much it costs to provide this level quality of education for this child, and then split up based on the population of children at the schools?
Yeah, and like just to end, so we can go to like a next topic. I agree with what my sister's saying, but like I'm not going to determine my value based on how much I perceive I've worked harder or I'm better than somebody else. There's no proof or fact that I can really give to like legitimately say that I'm a better human being. Like I might be better at a skill or better at something, but my humanity being superior than somebody else, and that means that I should get services that help me stay alive and somebody else doesn't, like that's just barbarous. And like I can't even entertain thinking something like that. So
I think the reason why you can't entertain that is because you are Black and you have grown up feeling being the person who was stigmatized by that thing. Whereas if you were white and you never had to see this, feel it, you weren't raised in a Black community or a Hispanic community where people were treated like that, it's hard to see it. It's very hard. And that's the reason we're here today, is to help you kind of see. And so I wanted to tie in some of the past to the present as well. And just to let you know, I read your Facebook comments. I don't always comment for your comments. I'm praying for a lot of you that I've known over the years. Sometimes you do see me step in, and I might step in privately or step in publicly and say some things, but it's only after I've had quite a bit of reflection. One of the things that I'm gonna tell you a story about my life, and it ties into what has told you for the past hour already. My father, when he was a kid, he went to school part of the day, and then in the fall, they pulled him out of school so that he could be a sharecropper. He cropped tobacco in the fields, and he wasn't allowed to be educated. His father was not allowed to go to school. The schools were segregated. Okay, his father's father died. So in third grade, his father had to drop out of school completely and take care of his mother and take care of his sisters. All right, that was my father's struggle. And as he got older, he was pulled out of school as well. His father started to work at a railroad. He worked at a railroad for 33 years. That railroader subjected the railroad, there weren't jobs for Blacks. So think about, you've all seen the movie The Help. You were patient, you were kind, you was whatever. It's pretty racist, but you've all seen it. The only jobs that were open for blacks back then, the 40s, 50s, 60s, were maybe waiting tables, right? They were maids in people's homes. They were street sweepers. They got to work on the railroads, things like that. My grandfather worked on the railroad, and he was also in the military previously. They subjected the blacks who worked on the railroad to asbestos, knowing that asbestos back then caused cancer. So the blacks who you see, many of us who you see, who are dying of COVID-19 have genes that relates to asbestos. That links back to Jim Crow. They did not allow us to have jobs back then because they wanted to keep us divided. They did not want blacks to advance. The blacks that you see dying of diabetes because they had underlying diabetes and hypertension, they're dying of COVID. It's not that we're fat, we're dumb, we're lazy. It's that our genes were mixed with water that was unsafe back in the day and even now in 2020, Flint, Michigan. What you're seeing is that the system was built so that what happened back then flows into now. So he taught you the history, and I just want to make sure that you understand the present. My father was able to get out of that because he joined the military at 17, 18. He graduated at the top of his class. He was one of 10 people, 10 blacks that they chose to get a secret, ultra top secret clearance to do something special in the Vietnam War. It's you all, some of you have met him, many of you have met him, but he's not the same person he used to be. Because of his service, he has many illnesses, and now we take care of him. Those were the jobs that were available to blacks back then. You could go and you could fight for your country. You could go and you could do the menial jobs. But when you did those menial jobs, they were putting things into your bodies and you were having the experience that would affect your generations to come. So when you hear the news that blacks are dying of COVID at an astronomical rate because we have underlying conditions, now you need to know that there was lead in our pipes, and they knew there was lead in our pipes and they did nothing. You need to know that there was asbestos, and they knew that there was asbestos and they did nothing. That our water was dirty, that our food was tainted, all these little things that we all didn't learn, but that blacks have lived over their lifetime. And now we're going forward and we're talking about Donald Trump. I'm going to give this back to you, Barrett. I apologize for taking so much of your time. Go ahead.
What's the question?
Talk to us more about what's happening right now with riots. I saw back from my friends groups, back when Colin Kaepernick was kneeling, how angry, just vehemently angry, many of them were. And how
about him kneeling? They were mad that he was kneeling?
About him kneeling, about kneeling with the flag. But then I also saw how passive they were as Black people have been killed. And how angry many of them are that now there is rioting and looting. Talk about all of that. Can you talk about, is any of that connected?
Well, yeah, of course it's connected. But like one of the things that's like really profound about America is that like the people, like we like to tell the story of like our society by telling like individualistic stories that talk about like the good things that people have. And what ends up happening is we find ways to excuse people who have like really bad like philosophies, but may be well-intended. And so like the people that are really mad that Colin Kaepernick is kneeling at a football game, like they seriously have a philosophy that prioritizes the entertainment of football, which we all know like literally just destroys people's brains, over like the well-being and the equality of African Americans. And so the thing that's really that impairs America's capacity for progress is we spend a lot of our time trying to humanize the people who care about like entertainment over existence, instead of humanizing the people that care about existence ahead of property or entertainment or even like their livelihood. And so like our conversations get skewed to the negative because we're trying to find like the goodness in people whose like way of life is just not sustainable or something that you would want to educate somebody else to believe. And like that's like a really massive impediment to progress. And so right now what we're happening is with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a person who a lot of people, for obvious reasons, don't like because he's a very, very bad person. Like his agenda, he only cares about himself, and he says stuff that's on the cusp of being overtly racist, like every day. But we have a society that has spent decades finding the good stuff in Donald Trump, rewarding him for various attributes and things that are just repugnant, but we can spin it. And like this is where like the power dynamics come in, where we've put more weight behind like repugnant white views than like completely humane and legitimate black ones. And so like the people that are outraged about Colin Kaepernick like kneeling because they can't like enjoy a football game, like we should live in a society where everyone has the language to articulate to that person like why that's wrong and why it makes sense for me, if I want to be a good person, to not associate with you. Like that is like your belief, if it seeps into my life, will make me a worse person, and I need the language to articulate that. We don't cultivate that language here, and that's a big problem because it undermines our capacity to create the change we want. I think what's happening right now is people really feel like they're at a loss for words, and they're trying to figure out how to like take this next step that tragically America has just never taken before. And so with George Floyd and the current environment in Donald Trump, you can see that the rhetoric that Trump is using to how to solve these problems are taken right out of like the segregationists, like Dixiecrats that were trying to like suppress the civil rights movement. Like all the legislation and the things that we have created in our society that makes the people on this chat think America is a good place arise from the people beating segregationists. Like, but Donald Trump, even to this day, we have a cultural hesitation to say, this is completely like inexcusable. This is not, we spin it. Oh, let's show the photo op. Let's act like, we can be reasonable with someone, even though his playbook, it's not only straight up out of the segregationist playbook, it's out of like the slave owners playbook from the 1800s. And since we have a society, and look, also this is an interesting thing, and this is something that as a black person I realized like in my 30s, and so I'm not even anticipating like white people will learn this like in their lifetime unless like a black person tells them to. But like I remember like I have an uncle who started doing like a lot of research on our family history. And I learned a lot about my family history in my 30s. And it hit me as like, why didn't my parents tell me all this stuff? Like, why didn't my mom talk about all these like fascinating stories of black history dating from Charleston, from like this, the 1800s and all sorts of this like fascinating stuff. And then it hit me. Like when my parents were like 13, 14, whatever, even younger, growing up was not that pleasant. It's not something that you're gonna like go tell your kids of how grand it was being black in the South when you're 13. Like black people for generations shield their kids from our own history because that history is so traumatic that you don't want to relive it. Like that's a severity of existence that America has not been told that they need to know. Like I had this one neighbor, his name is Brian, white guy, super nice guy. I get along with him great. This guy, my dad's from Alabama. In Alabama, you have to have property to be like a person, and you got to protect that property from white people or they're going to take it from you. Like that's just life as a black person. Brian had one day, maybe more than one day, when he would mow his lawn, he would mow part of our yard accidentally. Not a bunch of it, but a little bit. My dad was like, this guy doesn't respect my lawn. He doesn't respect my property. I don't like him. And we're like, it's just an accident, Dad. Don't worry about it. And then Brian has this dog. and this dog, they have like one of those electric fences, and this dog ferociously came running at my mom one day. It didn't get my mom because the fence stopped. And at that point, my dad was like, Brian's dead to me. I hate Brian. Brian is dead.
I was gonna say it like that.
And so one day, I'm hanging out with Brian and with his wife and his kid, and he was like, Barrett, why doesn't your dad like me? Why doesn't he like me? I just don't get it. Like, I haven't, like, but he doesn't like me. And he's like, I know I can't fix it, but like, I want to know why he doesn't like me. And I told him, I was like, yo, Brian, my dad grew up in Alabama. He wasn't allowed to have white friends ever in his life. Facts. He now lives in the suburbs of Atlanta, and he's got white people around him all the time. His kids hang out with white people all the time, you know? The fact that he is just like a civil, nice person should be like a miracle. Like that, like that is like, he's a nice guy. He doesn't have a bunch of friends, and he's not going to become friends with like every white person that lives around him. He was conditioned to not be able to have white friends. That is like a real thing. Like, that's the severity of like American society that we don't like articulate to people, or like the trauma that Black people have growing up, just existing, makes it so that you are less inclined to tell your kids about the trauma that you grew up growing up in the 60s, as like everyone you knew was getting beaten up by white people as you just tried to live as a human being. And then you feel the need to be perplexed why they don't want to have a bunch of white friends when they get older. Like, ideally, of course, it'd be great, but like, it's justified not to. And like, that's like a realization that like I think Americans need to think about. And it manifests to this day with like George Floyd and all sorts of different like tensions that we don't discuss because we don't actually articulate like the traumatic nature of our history and how much people carry that trauma, and it shapes them generationally in a myriad of ways. And that influences how we interact with each other. And it's quite significant.
Yeah. Well, Barrett was talking about my dad, and I couldn't help but chuckle because, yeah, my dad. But he does like bring up this great point that like Black people, like their families do not talk about the history. Like, it's not just like, hey kids, come around, it's story time. Let's talk about when I was a kid. It's like you ask questions and they just kind of like brush you off. And then like when someone feels like talking, you're like, I'm not gonna move. I'm just gonna be a fly on the wall so I can hear whatever they're gonna say, because this is like my one chance to hear this story.
And another key thing is like, I'm pretty confident a lot of African American parents don't tell their kids the trauma that they went through as kids at a personal level so they don't relive it, but also so that they don't like incline their kids to have a racist perspective and not like treat people equally. Like, and I think that is one of the, like the most profound things ever, like the commitment to equality that like so many Black people have, that they don't tell their kids about the trauma that they have suffered in their lifetime, so that they can hope that their Black kids treat people of other skin colors equally. Like, that's just so profound. And and that's also why like it's even more heartbreaking as we do this profound amount of work to have friendships across racial divides, that when something traumatic happens to us, these people that we've invested a lot of time into becoming our friends don't get it, or they don't believe that there's a legitimacy in it, and they don't become allies. I think one of the key things about this George Floyd part, the tipping point is so profound, where I think now these white, Asian, whatever communities that Black people have invested a lot of like cultural capital in creating equitable relationships across racial divisions. Now these people are more, they seem to have a greater desire to equitably fight with us for the capacity to live as equal human beings in America. And I'm not white, so I can't really speak as to what precisely was this tipping point, but I think it's a culmination of like so many things happening at the same time.
Hey, Barrett, Felicia again. So also, I think it's interesting that we've also invested a lot in the LGBTQ community as well. African Americans have, and we would hope that they would partner with us. Jewish people would partner with us. We're all in the same fight together. Latin American people, we're all in the same fight together. And now hopefully more of our Caucasian brothers and sisters in the fight as well. I'm wondering, I think for me, COVID-19 has put most of us in our friend group in a place where we're working from home. We're not as much going out, partying, dancing, doing all the things that we'd be doing on the weekends, some of us. And so when this George Floyd thing happened and Ahmaud happened, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, it's in our face because we got nothing else to look at. We're looking at life happen and we're like, oh crap, has this been happening all along? Thank you, Jack. Has this been happening all along? And heck yeah, it has. I think the same lynchings of the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s are still happening in America today. They just look different.
Yeah, I think you're right in that the fact that we're trapped in our homes makes it harder for us to have the regular distractions. Like, we're not commuting to work. We're, so like, it's amazing. Like if you have an extra 2 hours a day, the amount of stuff that you can see in 2 hours can like change your world. And I think that's a really good point. I've been trapped in my house the whole time working from home too, but I hadn't really thought in this context how that has changed people. And also it creates, and also Zoom. Like a lot of people don't use Zoom as much. And so now we've created this whole infrastructure to like stay in touch with our friends who we can't see. And so like 3 months ago, if someone said, hey, Barry, do you want to be in like a Zoom chat? I'm like, all right, nerd, whatever. But now it's like, of course I'll be on a Zoom chat with like 50 people. Like this is life now. And so I think it's created a whole new dynamic where we might be getting a bit more information than we did before, but we also have like we've worked to create an infrastructure where we can gather all of our friends in like this new medium to chat in a way to share information that we probably wouldn't have done like in January.
Right.
That's really significant, actually.
And if you think about it, Rodney King, he was on the TV. We saw him getting beat on TV. Mm-hmm. And a lot of us didn't care. It was kind of funny, right? Can't we all get along? Was kind of funny. We probably still use that now. But now that we're all stuck in the house, it's in our face. We really can't ignore it. So I wanted to just pivot a little bit, just because, Barrett, you had mentioned a few minutes ago about allyship. And I've experienced some allyship, and I'll tell you just a little bit about the allyship I've seen around here recently. And it's when I've had problems on Facebook with people being insensitive to the deaths of Black people. Some of you have come on and you've said the things that if me as a Black person said it would be totally lost. Because what we've been saying, Black people have been saying for 400 years. And that's why you hear Black people saying, I can't. I just can't. That's why you see us moving ourselves from conversations and ignoring many of you, right? But then we've got some white people who are literally trying to ally. Some perfect, some imperfect, most imperfect, right? But the intention is there, and we appreciate that. Barrett, can you talk a little bit about what allyship looks like? I think someone put a post in there earlier, like how can we ally? Because I think this is an issue. It is an issue, and I have to say I think I see it more with white women. How do they ally without taking over, right, and making it about them?
Before we move on to allyship, I just want to make a quick thing about why now, and it is a perfect storm of circumstances with the COVID-19 and all these things, and like there are people who have gotten attacked there in their homes. And so like with COVID-19, it feels like it's not even just ethnocide, but it's genocide, especially like in Chicago, where 80% of the COVID-19 deaths are African Americans. And it's because of the systemic destruction of what should be supporting our communities. And Tharunia mentioned how there's like a whole environmental factor that is coming into play about how we aren't supported just looking at city planning, because they see things showing that like in African American communities there are fewer trees, there are fewer sidewalks, and all these things are things that would make healthier homes, but because healthier lifestyles, but they're not there, and so it's making people more susceptible to this illness because
Right.
they just didn't have as healthy of lifestyles in the first place.
Yeah. So I'll go two questions. There's allyship, and then there's another about like the economic situation. And so with allyship, it's it's a difficult situation because as a Black person, essentially allyship requires like a continuation of like a profound level of empathy while also authority, because like we live in a place that's very transactional. So like, and also like this is a neat little fact. The word empathy wasn't created in Europe until like the late 1800s. It's a German word, Einfühlung, that was meant for having an emotional connection to a painting, and not even a person. But the English word empathy didn't show up until the 20th century. So like we live in a society where like empathy wasn't even a word for like the majority of it. And so our relationships are based on like a foundation that's like literally devoid of empathy. And so as a Black person, we have to empathize with people that are trying to have allyship with us, because the fact of the matter, like this is a weird example, but I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and we just coincidentally realized that her ancestors were slave owners in Charleston. And I was like, well, my family's from Charleston. And she's like, oh, that could be awkward. And the realization of this situation is like, years ago, I was socializing with her, and I was like, man, it's like really hard to be a white person. And she was like, what? I was like, I think it'd be rough. And she's like, I don't get it. And I was like you might get, white people get a lot of stuff. Like they get a lot of jobs and they can have like fancy, shiny things or whatever. But like as a Black person, we're not gonna get those shiny things. So we just have to invest most of our time in trying to be good people. Like that's all we can do, because we're not gonna get any of the money. So let's just see how good of a person we can be on like as little that America gives us. So like, I'm just gonna be indoctrinated with trying to be a good person. Like that's it. And if I get some money, that's fine. But like money's not gonna be like how I value my self-worth in society, because that'd be crazy, because I'm just not gonna get as much most likely. But white people, it's a completely different narrative. And then I was talking to my friend about this, and I was like, wow, if we look through history, we have to find like our ancestors. It's gonna be really hard that I'm gonna find an ancestor that's even close to as bad as hers. I don't have to carry that baggage. I don't have that weight. When I look into the past, it's gonna be pretty pleasant. It isn't gonna be pleasant for her. And like, that requires some empathy. That requires me to like look at this person and have this conversation. Like, I know what you're going through is gonna be like really hard. And as a Black person, like, I can't relate to that. Like, there's no way I'm gonna be able to ever relate to having an ancestor that owned a bunch of people. It's not happening. But like, I get that you have this struggle, that you need like a mental block, a mental burden that you have to like cope with. That's gonna be quite difficult. And you're gonna try to cope with it as you help me. I have empathy with how difficult that's gonna be. And I'm not going to like ridicule someone or make someone feel bad as they're dealing with something that's as difficult as that. And I think that's one of the most complex parts for African Americans, because also at the same time, you're having this empathetic connection while knowing that you live in a society that like doesn't rely on empathy. It's very transactional, opportunistic, and that if you open that door for empathy, that person might take that and say, oh, now I'm the boss. And then it all went to crap. And so you have to be like empathetic and like really tough and like strong. And that requires like an emotional solidity that is difficult. And I think that's like one of the most complex parts of like allyship amongst like African Americans and white Americans. But like allyship is essential because like we have a whole culture that's based on devaluing Black people, but not devaluing white people. And like white people in this example, and with George Floyd, a lot of them were putting themselves between African Americans and the police to kind of dare police to devalue white people. That is profound. That is not a thing that we've seen in American society. If we look at the civil rights struggle, we'll see like a smattering of like a Jewish person here or there, but we're not going to see a row of white people standing ahead of the black people as we fight for civil rights. So it's really evident the benefit of allyship in calling the bluff, America's bluff regarding racism. It's evident. Creating that equitable bond and having like that unique type of empathy that like America requires that we've never really taught people how to have is what makes it difficult. But allyship is essential because at the end of the day, like we all would like to have the idea that we could form an equitable ally relationship with anybody in America, regardless of how they look. And so like, this is something that we try to do on a micro level with our friendships, our relationships. And it's something we also have to figure out how to do at a macro level to create like systemic equitable change.
I ask you a question, sorry, in there. How does one develop empathy? Because we have something in our scene happening right now. Many of you have seen it. All of us, if you're on Facebook, we're connected to one person who's on that same string with me, where I called them out for being non-incompassionate and non-empathetic because they were making jokes about Black people getting shot at with a bow and arrow. And I was surprised that we're here, this has just happened, and yet my swing dancing friends are on a string making jokes. So, how does one develop empathy?
So is the question like, how do you develop empathy in those people or
no, and yourself? Because I think that the issue is that sometimes we don't see that we're not being empathetic, because America has cultivated a culture where we are not empathetic towards Blacks. We're just not.
Well, we're not
empathetic. If Harambe died, it's a problem. Last week there was on Hilton Head Island near where I'm from, an alligator died. It was a problem. But if a Black person dies or a Black person gets hit by a car, we just keep going. How do we develop empathy for Black people?
So Europe is a fascinating place because empathy is like a new concept for the entire continent. And prior to that, and this is what America has sympathy. America has forming connections with like entities. Like that's what America is based around, sympathy. And Europe is based around sympathy. Empathy, if you look at like a lot of Asian countries and like meditative practices, empathy is something that you have to exert effort and cultivate, and you have to have a language that justifies why this is beneficial. Like in America, we have a whole society based on like the lack of empathy. And if you think that like our status quo is good and maybe like have as a flaw here or there, then you're going to be disincentivized to be empathetic, because empathy will completely like upend the entirety of American society. Like it's built without it. So to develop empathy, first of all, you have to exercise it. And like a very simple exercise is acknowledging that like you aren't special. Like no matter, like America's all about telling everyone that they're special and that we're all unicorns and that, magic dust is just a thing that emanates from all of us. No. Like none of us are special. Nobody here is special. And you have to recognize that you're not special and acknowledge that all the stuff around you is just as special as you are. And you then mentally put yourself in the place of whatever that thing is. And so a key thing to practice, and this is where it gets even better, is nature. Like I remember I had some debate with someone, I think I was like 16 or something. And she was talking to me about like being smart or talented or whatever. And I was like, I might be talented, but like, I'm not as talented as that tree out there. And she was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, that tree has been alive for like hundreds of years. No matter how smart I am, I'm never gonna be good at living that long. Never gonna happen. So like, if we're coming up with like an arbitrary barometer of skills that make someone good, I'm gonna lose if the arbitrary barometer is that. If we make an arbitrary barometer that being good at something means playing soccer, well then I'm way better than a tree. But like, who cares? Like it doesn't matter. Like it's all arbitrary. Like I'm nothing, that tree's nothing, we're all nothing, we're all something. And that's like an exercise in empathy. America denies that whole reality, and that's just like how the world works. Especially if you think about like we have a narrative of individualism. That's crazy. Like the amount of people that have influenced and shaped me into being who I am is massive. And a lot of them, like, I've forgotten their names. It might have been something like a person said to me one day, and I was like, whoa. And then I thought about that for the next 2 months, and then something miraculous happened. Like, that's all existence. That person whose name I forgot, really important. That person is also a nothing. I'm also a nothing too. And this is the exercise in empathy. If you only have self-worth on imagining that you are a something that's only is valued in comparison to something else, then like you have just kind of reduced yourself to like less than like, you know, not something healthy.
Fair. Well, before I have mom jump in because she wants to say something. Oh, by the way, this is our mom. Hi. Hi. Her name's Asina.
My dad can't be bothered.
Yeah. So this thing reminds me of the Word article that you sent out the other day because Barrett and I both studied French.
Oh yeah.
And there's this pronoun on, O-N. And like Barrett in his article is talking about the duality of on, which does not exist in the English language because it's acknowledging someone as both an individual and a plural as part of something. So like this whole concept of I'm special is divorcing yourself from your connection with anybody else. And so like that's how we have people with this COVID-19 thing who aren't wearing masks because it's like, well, I'm special. And saying that you're more important than other people.
So one key thing to develop empathy, it's all exercises, and a lot of cultures help people exercise empathy by having words that are inherently empathetic, where like you practice the empathy by saying the word every day. And so like on is a really good one because like my sister said, the word is singular and plural. Like the phrase on y va, which is O-N, next word is Y, next word V-A. It means let's go or we go there, but you conjugate it as if it's a singular. Va is the singular plural for to go, or aller. And so just in the basic phrase that French people are told to speak every day, and all, if you look it up and translate it, it means one, we, us, and everyone. And that's encompassed in one word. So that word itself encourages people to have empathy. Just there you go. America has words that's all about encouraging individualism, and it is just a joke. By the way, if you like this idea of words, I have a newsletter called The Word. It's on my website, scl.community. You subscribe to it, and I just send you like a free, like a word every Sunday to like hopefully enlighten.
Okay.
My mom has something to say.
Since I have been blessed to raise both of these lovely people, so I want to kind of give y'all a little insight in what my strategy was with him, because I did grow up in Charleston, South Carolina. I wound up working for IBM, and was in the computer industry for 43 years. Okay, lived in Montgomery, Alabama. Noticed Charleston and Montgomery are totally different. Racial relationships in Charleston much easier than racial relationships in Alabama. Okay, totally different, and it's partly because the blacks in Charleston were brought over specifically to be in Charleston to be rice farmers. And so our culture stayed with us a lot longer than people who were shipped over to other states. And so we wound up not having it as rough in a lot of conditions in Charleston. But I wound up living in Montgomery, married, found him, we married and wound up with lovely kids. And I wanted to live, I worked in an integrated environment. I was the only black systems engineer, female systems engineer in Montgomery, Alabama. And when I came there, to Atlanta, still always a minority, okay? And so I figured if I work in a minority environment, integrated environment. Lived in Cobb County, integrated environment, went to an integrated church. My kids went to private school, it was integrated schools, okay? And all of this is because I wanted us to learn how to work together, okay? Concerted effort. I didn't have to live in a Black neighborhood for people to notice I was Black. I noticed the complexion gave it away, okay? So everybody can see I'm Black. But I wound up working with everybody, okay, and teaching my kids how to work with everybody. And when I found situations to help with their empathy, okay, for them to care about other people, if they did something wrong, and I thought it was it caused somebody some pain, I would tell them a story from my life, or I would make up one to make them feel the pain that that person felt to the very core of their soul. I'd have them in tears by the time I was through with my story. That guaranteed that my kids would never, ever again in this lifetime do that same thing to anybody else. And that worked.
And by the way,
I'll
say, I hate to interrupt my mom, but I just wanted to add like an anecdote on this. Like when I was a kid, I used to love horror movies. I could watch like Silence of the Lambs and just be like, this is hilarious. I get it. My mom started like doing all this empathy stuff with me. And now when I watch like a horror movie and I see something bad happen to someone, I'm like, oh God, I can't watch this. I gotta pause this and walk around. I can't even watch the stuff that I like to watch as a kid because I got empathy like all in me. And but it worked out great. I will say, like, this is the key thing, like it's a practice. And like if you look at like Asian countries, their religions, they call practices. Like it's not something that you like is defined, like divinely bestowed upon you. It's a thing that you work at every single day because there's a philosophy that articulates the benefit of having empathy. Like it's a skill that you develop, just like going to the gym or eating healthy or whatever. Like that's a thing. And like it's just not a thing that we do in America. Like my mom's articulating a philosophy of how to like raise her kids, and like it's not a one-off. It's not like you take a diet and you do something for like send someone to a camp. It's like a thing you do all the time, and without the language to articulate why you need to do it all the time, you won't do it all the time. And that's philosophy. And America's like a place that doesn't really prioritize philosophy, and so that's partially why like my work, I articulate myself as a philosopher, because like that's the work. Another thing that's really interesting to point out, the juxtaposition between Charleston and Alabama, is like Charleston's a port city. And so due to that, there are people from around the world who had like less racist perspectives lived in Charleston. But like Alabama and Mississippi are like very isolated. And there's the amount of stories of like runaway slaves, like leaving plantations and then like realizing that there was just nowhere else they could go. Like they're gonna get caught. But like my mom's Gullah Geechee, so we're Gullah Geechee, and like Gullah Geechee people got together and were able to go to the Sea Islands and actually live free off the coast. And so like geographically, Charleston allowed Black people to have greater access to liberation via like the islands off the coast, but also exposure to people who weren't as racist. Like once I started learning more about my family history, one of the fascinating stories is like one of the nicest white people that like has ever existed in our history in like the 1800s was a former Haitian plantation slave owner. He was an aristocrat who owned a bunch of slaves in Haiti. And when the rebellion happened, he had to get out of there and he was going to get murdered. And he gets to Charleston, another white person of his owned a Black woman. And he's like, she's attractive. I'm going to make her my wife. And this dude's white French wife and kids went back to France. And he lived in Charleston with this Black woman and had like 8 kids with her. He had like a house in like the white town and a house in the Black town. And he would try to put his Black kids on the census as white. And by the time he died, he bought all their kids freedom. And this is from a person who was a slave owner in another country. And so like when we're having a conversation about like the severity of slavery in America compared to like other places, like the Haitian slave owner was like a miracle worker in comparison to like the American slave owners that my dad's family and everyone in Alabama had a much greater experience with.
Also, like just another example of like how far the Black people in Charleston were able to just like protect themselves and have a whole society of their own is that y'all might hear that my mom has an accent, and that's, I know it's shocking. It shocks her every time. But like this is a Charlestonian accent that is specific to the African Americans. And so like the white people from Charleston, they sound just like regular Southern people. But the Gullah Geechee accent, it has this lilt that's a little bit more like the people who live in the Caribbean. And that's just because of the triangular slave trade. Sorry, what?
Yeah, it has the African cadences, which the Caribbeans do too. And in Charleston, they didn't separate all the Black people and ship them everywhere because the main staple crop there was rice. West Africa is just like the marshiest place. Rice is all they eat. So they're like, these slave owners are like, oh my goodness, these savages who we have to give civilization are already experts at cultivating the crop we're going to grow. What a coincidence. We'll keep them all here. There's no way they'll band together and try to get away. And they did.
Yeah.
You know?
Some of them did.
Why go with like, are there another question or anything? I can talk about that.
But yeah, so this discussion's supposed to go until about like 9 p.m. And so we have about 10 minutes left. And so the thing is that like, sorry, what?
Rachel, we can stay at like this Zoom room, stay open as long as we need it to. I think that there are a lot of people here who are interested in talking action items and strategies. So I'm going to let you lead the discussion, but I'm like, yeah, we could stay as long as we need.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I was actually thinking on that line because I was thinking about the protests and I was talking to people at work, which, you know, is kind of a hairy thing. But there's like, why are people burning things? Why is there all this destruction? And I'm like, it's because there's been this burden for generations. And like, we don't even know where to start. Like, it's just everything. Like when someone's asking like, Rachel, how's it going? I'm like, it's a lot. It's everything. And so like, I was thinking like, you know, we can't see the forest for the trees. And the thing is that like, if you're going to solve this problem or like at least try to chip away at it, you have to like identify points where you can initiate the thing instead of just like trying to hit everything. And the thing with systemic racism is that it just branches the entire gamut. And so like, we have to like try to initiate things in our personal lives and our communities / like spheres of influence, cities, states, and on federal levels. And Barrett, you look like you want to say stuff.
Yeah, so I gotta change it real quick because what my sister's saying, it all makes sense. But like how Americans want to approach solutions far too often is just like a series of action items that we hope that they're interconnected. But like what you really need to do is spend time cultivating a philosophy or like adopting one that then will guide a series of actions. And so like my work and like the idea of the word ethnocide, the point of it is to kind of like focus people's attention on like one key flaw, like one key fissure, a problem, so that you can then matriculate a series of action items that will be legitimate because they derive from like recognizing like the core problem and not saying a series of different items that we hope align. And so like I think the question about empathy is key because at the end of the day, that's really all Black people are asking for. Like we can make it really complicated, but we're just asking for empathy. We're like, if you could imagine that this would happen to you, how would you respond? And if you can do that, and then you don't respond accordingly, then you are clearly like at fault on your own. And that's the key thing. Like, we're not asking white people or anyone in America to do something that we aren't willing to do. And that is the key part. I think what we articulate white privilege or whatever is a capacity to like extricate yourself from existence and just like protect yourself with your money. And that's not a privilege. That's really like a massive hindrance, because like money is just whatever. What you really need is to break down this like security blanket of like extricating yourself and engage in activities that connect you to the world in which you live, which is your neighbors who are Black, Asian, Indian, but also the environment and the air that we breathe, because all of this is connected. And like that's and like clearly colonization is a process that was built on like distancing all European people from existence in this continent, and with the goal of like remaking it so that it looks like Europe. Why would you do that, you know? And that's just a bad idea. So the key thing for action items is practice developing empathy, and then trust your actions, trust your judgments on that case. Like if you're a white person and you have empathy with Black people and you go, man, there's been a long time since a Black person has been able to lead this group. Maybe it would make sense for me to apply empathy and let them be the boss and trust that they will reciprocate, because that's what empathy entails, that type of reciprocation. And if like the guess is that Black people are going to be the least empathetic in that arrangement, that's absurd, because like we have to be empathetic to just exist. Just like my mom said, she grew up in an area that was all racist. My dad grew up in a place all racist. Her philosophy for how to make us people was to make sure that we were empathetic and could feel how other people felt. She ain't the only Black person that has that idea, you know? So that's the key thing. And so, like, for example, a friend of mine contacted me today. A friend reached out to me right now about how can they help. And what they wanted to find out was like organizations of color, and organizations that are helping people like get out of jail, bail organizations, to help support this. That makes sense. That's like a clear extension of empathy. Like what normally happens, and when things like this happen, is white people go, the ACLU, of course I'm giving to the ACLU. They're the ones that do everything. But there's like all these other minority organizations that were like the ones that were at the forefront of like the civil rights struggle, that struggle for money all the time. But like when you have like when you cultivate sympathy and you find a way to like people who are like yourself, you don't think about giving to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. You think about giving to the ACLU instead. Like my girlfriend works for MALDEV, which is the Mexican iteration of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And no one thinks about giving them money. And like, they're the reasons why like Latinos have like the vast majority of like civil liberties they have in society today. And so empathy, cultivating that, and then believing that you have, that your judgments will be sound is a key thing to do. And then if you find out that they're not, and a Black person tells you, keep your empathy and don't like get outraged and indignant because that happens way too often.
Can I ask you, you said something when you first started talking. You said adopt a philosophy. Are you trying to say, just correct me if I'm wrong, are you trying to say, don't try and do all the things, it's too much. Find something that you're passionate about. If it's mass incarceration, focus on mass incarceration and do all you can do in that part. Let that be what you work in. If it's about women and children, find something there. If it's about being able to feed homelessness or hunger, go deep into that. Or is that what you're saying? Don't spread yourself thin, or what do you mean by philosophy?
Oh,
Sorry.
no.
I see heads nodding, so maybe somebody else had the same question.
No, I think it's a great question. I'm not saying it's a bad question at all. So much empathy. What I'm saying is, like, America exists without philosophy. And this is a very big problem. Like, a lot of European societies will have philosophers. Like France will have like Jean-Paul Sartre, and, you know, Germany will have Nietzsche or Hegel or Kant. And people will attach themselves to these philosophical ideas, which at the end of the day boil down to cultivating empathy and a connection to the world. And once you cultivate that philosophy, you'll find the avenue that you want to pursue, that you have the most passion in. But that also will equip you to go someplace else, because you will approach that space with a similar philosophy. So, like, my work, I focus clearly a little bit more on the African American community. But my friends, a lot of them are Latino, Mexican Americans. I'm not an expert in that space, but I can go into their space and contribute and be beneficial because my philosophy allows me. I just won't be the expert. I'll be the expert someplace else because I'll know more. It makes more sense. And so, like, having a philosophy, and there's so many that you can read about and adopt, but America focused more on giving people action items and having like a weird quasi-American philosophy of, like, we are inherently good, therefore we'll do good things. And that's just lazy. That's a bunch of nothingness. That doesn't amount to anything. And so you have to have, like, a greater degree of your philosophy, of your understanding of, like, who you are and, like, how you exist in the world. And then that will guide your actions a bit more, and you'll be more dynamic. Mm-hmm. So that's what I meant. So don't pick one silo. You could do a whole bunch of different things.
You're like, who am I? You're asking us to ask the question, who am I? What do I really believe in? And how can I show love?
Like, there really isn't another question you should ask yourself. Like if I don't know who I am, then how am I going to be able to interact with anybody else? Like, if I don't, I'll just be interacting with that person as a lie. Like, that would just be illegitimate. Like, you always have to work on yourself. That's just like a constant struggle, but that's like a fun struggle we get to have for being alive. Like, that's the fun part. You know, like my mom and sister can tell you, I love playing soccer, like soccer a lot. The fact that I like playing soccer means that I practiced a bunch. And by practicing a bunch, I did a bunch of stuff wrong, and I looked like an idiot sometimes, and then I got better. My philosophy was, I want to try to be good at this. That's it. But I had to work on myself every day to do it. And, like, if you view it as a philosophy, effort won't be perceived as a burden. Effort will just be a part of existence. Like, you know, eating breakfast isn't a burden. Eating dinner is not a burden. Do it every day. Got to make new stuff every single day. It's not a burden because we have a different perspective out there. Just like Nicole said, dance is a great metaphor. My sister also told me something one of her dance teachers said way back in the day. This person's name I also have completely forgotten.
Bridget.
No, I don't know who it was.
But I have to hear what he says first.
She said practice makes permanent.
Oh, that was my orchestra teacher, Mrs. Trombley.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I don't remember this person's name. I don't remember what their profession is, but the philosophy of practice makes permanent. That makes sense. It doesn't make perfect. It makes permanent. Therefore, I need to make sure I'm practicing the right way to be good at something. Effort.
I want to jump in there for a quick minute.
Yes. Let's do it.
Since I'm pretty sure I'm the oldest person in this whole group, okay? And I've learned a lot of lessons over the years, okay? And like, first of all, I want to let all you lovely white people out here know, we don't really want to hurt anybody, okay? Black people just would like to be able to live our lives without being terrified that somebody's going to hurt one of our kids or something. Because when you think through your life, think it was the last time some Black person scared the junk out of you. Probably never happened. But there are a lot of white people who are scared the junk out of a lot of black people, you know. And what I want you to basically understand is when you go out in this world, think to yourself when you meet somebody that you like them. Find something about each person that you meet to choose to like, because happiness is a choice. We don't want to hurt any of you. We just would like to be able to live our lives without being traumatized. When you realize that a lot of black people have high blood pressure and diabetes, and they don't even have to be overweight, it's because we don't sleep well. They found that we don't sleep well because it's generational curse from being traumatized during slavery and during Jim Crow time frame.
They have found that there are things that get altered in people's DNA that has an effect on them.
Yeah.
If you don't get enough sleep, you can wind up being diabetic and have high blood pressure.
Yeah. Where is it? It's called epigenetics. I got a book on it. It's real good.
Yeah. Felicia wrote epigenetics. So yeah.
And then on top of that, so just realize that we want y'all to be happy. We don't have any problem living next door to anybody. We just really want to live a comfortable life like anybody else, and work and get paid for what we're doing in our work. We want to have equal pay, just like all women. Women still are not equal. Imagine being black and woman. We definitely making less with that combination. But what I would recommend all of you do is to get a book that changed my entire life. Okay? And the name of the book is The Greatest Salesman in the World, and it's by the author Og Mandino. He spells it phonetically O-G, then M-A-N-D-I-N-O. Most books will tell you a whole bunch of rah stuff and try to pump you up, but they don't ever tell you anything to do to change your life. This book will tell you exactly what to do to change your entire life. It is a story set back in biblical time. The book is only about 110 pages at the max.
Yeah.
But in the book, it will get to a group of scrolls, and it will tell you how to read them and how often to read them. When you follow those rules and do what the book tells you, you can change your entire life so that you will be happier in all situations. You get more control over things. You will understand how people function. It has made the biggest difference in my life of any book that I've ever read. Okay? And so if y'all want to become the best you that you can be, I highly recommend that you get The Greatest Salesman in the World. And it's out there in paperback. You probably can find it. You can always find it at Barnes & Noble's in the religion section, or you can order it off of Amazon.
Is it parts 1 and 2 or just
part
one?
No, don't get 2.
Okay,
part 1 first. Do part 1 and follow the scrolls. It'll tell you how often to read them. And when you do this, you change your habit, because basically we're all creatures of habits. You have good habits and you have bad habits. You cannot stop a habit. You can only replace a habit with another habit. And it's going to teach you how to do that. And I've read like almost every book that Og Mandino has written. And for those of you who know about positive thinking, Norman Vincent Peale was the creator of the concept of positive thinking. And on the back of one of Og Mandino's books, Norman Vincent Peale he stated that he had read everything that Og Mandino had ever written, and that he benefited from the writings of Og Mandino. The father of the concept of positive thinking benefited from Og Mandino. And it's always in a story form, and you always get instructions on how to change your life.
So can I ask you, Norman Peale, which book you recommend?
No, from Norman Vincent, I just do Og Mandino's.
Okay.
Period. I just totally, I had a boss that was driving me crazy. And I called my dad. My parents were divorced since I was about 6, but my dad's a minister, and we always stayed close together. And I called him, and I was telling him about all the pain I was going through. And he said, I have just a book for you. It's probably out of print, so I'll send you my copy. And he sent me his copy of hardback copy of The Greatest Salesman in the World. And I was so stressed out that I felt like I was a drowning person grasping for air. And I grabbed that book and I read the story and I followed the instructions, and it changed my entire life. And I've given the book to so many different people. There were 3 guys in back in the good old days, we actually had a computer room, big old room, and these 3 operators all wanted to change their jobs. I was a programmer, and I was telling them about the books, about my book. And so during lunch, I went and bought 2 copies of the book, because that's the only thing they had in the store. And I came back to work, and I gave the guys the books. I said, I can give you those tools to change your entire life. It's up to you if you follow them. So I could give 2 of them the books, and I loaned the other guy my book and said, I'll get you another one, and I'll bring it tomorrow. He said, no, I'm keeping yours because yours is highlighted. But so every time I saw them, they had their book with them, and they would tell me, I'm following the scrolls. I'm changing my life. All of them wanted to get out of operations into better jobs. All of them got out of operations into better jobs, into management jobs, and it changed their lives. Right. So I like to pass on positive things, because learning a lesson and keeping it to yourself is really rather selfish.
My mom also has no official connection with these books. She is not getting any sort of
That is so true. And Dino died back early 2000s and stuff. He died, but I love his books.
No kickbacks.
On the books are set in biblical time. The book is set in biblical time. You will actually feel as if the story could have happened exactly the way he said. I love that book, and I also love his Universe of Success, and
We've read a lot of books.
We read a lot. We read. Like, I love positive things and like positive energy.
We've read books.
There was one question that I think might have gotten lost in the chat, and I want to make sure to bring it up. So first of all, thank you for that lovely recommendation. I have saved it, and for those who are curious and like trying to save all the links, I'm compiling all the links that are shared today to share them in case you are worried about losing them. There was one question that was asked that I think is pretty relevant to the empathy that we were talking about earlier, and maybe expanding this conversation to some of the folks who are in here, especially the Black folks who are in here. And if you want to talk, you are not required to, obviously, but it says on the empathy topic from Jack, I would love to hear from the Pittners, Felicia, Jerry, Terrace, etc., if you have pet peeves in the dance community. And I know this is specific to the dance community, but I think it relates probably to the community at large, because.
Well, I certainly think it's worthy of bringing this to the dance community a little bit, because I think we can all relate to that. And it's also reminded me a little bit about our discussion that we had a few months ago about appropriation in the community, as some of these things are connected just a little bit. But I've honestly just been struggling this weekend trying to find the appropriate response to all of this, because, you know, I was talking to Liz and how as a teacher and a professional, I've insulated myself because I've worked really hard to be successful. I've been a teacher for almost 20 years. I have a great community, and I've worked really hard to get here. And I've somewhat insulated myself. I have my personal community that I have my dance community that I love and I participate in, and I feel very safe. And so seeing all of this happen, it's just sort of reminding me of that path that I took to get here, and how arduous it was and how difficult it was at times. And just hearing from Mama Pittner, and just a lot of those things are echoed as what my mother taught me. I had to be amazing to get here. Like, I couldn't make any mistakes, right? I had to get scholarships. I grew up in a small town. We had just a few red lights. You know, we had that railroad track that cut the middle of the town. You had the black side, you had the white side. There's the part of town that you never went to, right? And so all of these things are very, very real to me. And so I had to be almost perfect to make it out. And once I did, you know, and I did that natural thing, and I wanted to never go back to that again. And so I saved money, I insulated myself, I surrounded myself with good people, and I make really, really good choices about where I go. And I'm constantly watching my back and making sure I still stay on that straight path and not making any mistakes. and it's very difficult to do. But what this past weekend has done is it's been a little bit of a check on me, and just sort of remind me that, oh, I had a pretty crazy path to get to where I am right now. And so now that I'm here, how do I respond to it, and how do I get the people around me to respond to it? And I've had some, Brooks Promote sent me a great text this weekend. We chatted a little bit, and just, I've been talking with Liz, and she's been talking with her family, and trying to get everybody on board, and everybody's wanting an action item, which is why the previous discussion was so important about what do we do, right? What do I do with my hands? I want to do something. And that's the most difficult thing to figure out. And as an educator, I'm going to have 200 kids staring at me, hopefully, in a few weeks, and they're going to look for me for leadership. And I just keep coming back to the kids that I teach, the youth that I teach high school, my high school teacher, high school band director. And I teach at Sprayberry. Actually, Rachel went to the high school that I teach at. It's a very diverse school. It's a very diverse school. It's a mix of various socioeconomic areas in our county. And I think it's the United Nations. I love working there, and I've worked at an all-Black school, 94% minority school, and I've worked in the upper end where, you would have to kind of search a little bit to find a person of color. But I love the school. I've been there for, I guess, 15 years now, and it's just an amazing place. And I feel very comfortable there because the student body that I teach reflects the world that I live in. And those students, I mean, they're amazing, and they're going to change all of this. I have no doubts about it. And I look forward to it. And they push me every single day. We've been doing leadership training since we've been in quarantine, and just having some discussions with them, and having them realize that there are forces in the world that can pull them away from each other, and that they have to work to get back to each other. It's been a really big learning opportunity for them, and they're on fire. They cannot wait to get back to each other, and they cannot wait to make change. And so I'm excited for them, and that's where my optimism lives. And so, that's just my 2 cents. But I don't have any concrete thoughts right now, because it's still happening. I mean, there are protests right down the street in Atlanta right now, outside the door. So I don't think we know where this is going to land right now, but when it lands and settles down, I hope we all can put some action items in front of us and go forth. And I can tell you, my cultivated social media feeds and my cultivated friend circles, they're on fire right now, and it's an amazing thing. And even from folks that I did not expect it to come from. And so I think change is on the horizon, but we gotta stick to it. And I think that next generation that's going to come through are really going to be the ones that we need to put our energy in and make sure they're set up. Yeah.
Can I just piggyback off of that real quick? Terrence, I thought that was essential. And it also shows that, like, even within like one lifetime as an African American, like the struggle, and also like the emotional distancing and like quasi like selective amnesia that you have to like be comfortable and happy, where you almost have to like forget your own struggle to feel happy or to do like, and then these reminders that like with George Floyd or Trayvon Martin, like it's kind of like you get reminded of all the trauma you've had to go through to get to like an equal position. And also like it's one of those things where like to be in an equitable position with so many like white Americans or other people in our society, you have to like mask your backstory and not tell who you are a lot of the time. And if you do that so often, you live that. And then these things happen, and now you have like this wellspring of emotion that you don't want to bubble up. It's like you don't know if you are able to contain it. You don't know if your diverse friend group will be able to like understand it. you'll feel like embarrassed about being empathetic or having like an emotional connection to your own experiences. It's like this dynamic, this like that. And then the thing that's also key is there's an incentive to not articulate it, but there's also like an incentive our society to not give the language or validate the language for that experience. And so now you're like in this position where you have these feelings and you don't even have the language to share it with like the people you work so hard to be your friend. And like, that's really real. And that happens to Black people at like every level. Like it's really funny, but like, this isn't funny, but I'm just weird. And as a kid, I was like strangely like existentialist and like dark without really knowing it. And I could just be like, everything's a nightmare and just be fine. Like, and like most people just, their brain isn't wired to like be like that. Like they need to believe that stuff is good to like want to be good. And for some reason, like I didn't need that. And so like I have almost like this weird like empathy, but yet like emotional distancing from like a lot of experience from African Americans, because like I didn't have the desire to show anyone that I was good at stuff. I was like, I live in the South. Everyone down here is just a psychopath. Like, I don't need to prove to any of them that I'm good. Like, they're crazy. And as I got older, I recognized that like, no one seems to think that. And that requires, I didn't anticipate it, but it required like an extra level of empathy within my friends in the Black community, because I wasn't like having the emotional connection to the struggle that everybody else was, because I was emotionally different in some way. But like what Terrence just said is like real. And like most Black people don't get the opportunity to say it in even like a remotely articulate way. Like they'll say it by smashing something. They'll say it by yelling at someone, just letting that stuff out, like how you would let an outpouring of emotion. But like, if you know a Black person who is in middle class America and whose parents weren't rich, that's pretty much what happens like 99% of them. The ones whose parents do have money, their parents have at some point told them a story about how they didn't have money and that they had to do what Terrence just did, and you need to appreciate that. But that's like a generational sentiment.
And if their parents, just to be clear, if their parents didn't have money, it's not because they didn't go to college or didn't have a good college or because they didn't apply themselves. It was because the opportunities that were afforded to white people during slavery and after slavery up until very recently were not the same afforded to Blacks. And they still aren't the same. Okay, so I just want to make sure we put that in there so that we frame it so when you walk away, you can see that there's something different, because we had to do the same things, but with a lot less opportunity. I've actually got to go. I've got a family here, and I have a 22-year-old son who many of you already know because he was at Hot Jam when he was 7 years old. And I got to go and put my arms around him and hold him. That's what parents do when there are drones flying over their homes in Sandy Springs. And there are drive-throughs from unmarked police cars in their communities in Sandy Springs and in Alpharetta because the white people are scared of the Black people who have no power to come up to North Fulton to ever hurt them, because we can't do those things. So I got to go do that. But I wanted just to tell you one more thing before I go. Things that you can do is, one, the heart work. This is an issue of the heart. And the question we should ask ourselves when we're thinking about commenting on something, or we're reading something or watching something on TV is, wow, is this love? Like, how could I be loving? What does love require of me? And figuring out what that is. We've become so desensitized because of video games and TV shows I'm telling you, I saw all the Marvel movies. I've seen all the Star Wars. I was a nerd before that stuff was even cool. I'm telling you, okay? But the thing about it is that all that fighting and killing and shooting and stuff desensitizes us from real reality. And reality is that the person who's brown skinned in front of you is a living, breathing human being who has hopes and dreams, and they hurt and they're in pain. They have people who love them, mothers and fathers and aunts. And so whether we're at work and we're complaining about someone who's Black, who's putting in double the hours probably for less opportunity, making less money than you to do more work, or whether we're in church with them and we're deciding whether we're going to invite them to lunch with everybody else or dinner, or whether we're deciding whether or not we're going to cross the street because we see a Black man coming, whether we're going to hire someone to do a job for them and us in our home because Black people are lazy. We have to ask ourselves, what does love require of me? What has been programmed in that I need to work on inside my heart so that I can be a better person? That's the biggest action item we can take. Other action items that I would do is, they say call your Black friends and make sure we're okay. Am I okay? No. But do I want all of you calling me? No. I don't. I've been talking for years, man. I'm tired. Do I want some of y'all Black folk to call me who can empathize and we can share these stories and cry and hug and sing Kumbaya? Probably, because we can do that. Do some of that heart work. And then call New York City and say, hey, why aren't you guys arresting Karen? Write on your Facebook, hey, I think Karen should be arrested. We should be held accountable when we call the police and make statements that could get a Black person killed. Mm-hmm. Do those simple things. And then there will be the harder things in the future, but start with the simple ones. Of course, you can sign a petition, but you can also type on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. When you see someone put something in that's not loving, you can I am your friend and say, hey, listen, I'm not quite sure that's loving or kind. Are you sure that's what you meant? But the main thing is start right there with the heart and the inside. Love you guys. It's so good to see you. Take care. Hope to see you on the dance floor August, September, because I'm not coming out anytime soon. Take care.
Thank you so much for contributing and being here, Felicia. It's such a pleasure to have you in our community.
You. Yeah, thank you guys for joining. It was so nice to see so many of you from out of town. I got to see your pictures. And Jerry, hello. Ramona, hello. How good to see all of y'all. Take care.
I think that Odysseus has been interested in contributing, and I want to make sure that he gets heard because there are so many people on here. It's hard to see when people are trying to contribute. Right.
Odysseus is a dancer.
Hello, everyone. How you doing? Thank you for having me join the conversation. I greatly appreciate it. And I was kind of flipping through the people as well, so it's good to see everyone too. So yeah, I joined in late, so I wasn't able to join in starting at 7 o'clock or anything like that. So fortunately, I missed all of the great words of wisdoms that everyone was talking about earlier. But with the dancing aspect, since we were talking about that earlier, and to somewhat piggyback on what Baird and Terrace were saying, I too had a really strong sense of kind of frustration and anger, and I realized that I was projecting a lot of it on the dance scene as a collective whole for both swing and blues, because I do both. And it was the kind of anger because I was really more upset at like the silence from a lot of the band leaders and musicians and some of the top level instructors not really saying something about like what was going on. And it kind of just struck me because I'm just kind of like, well, why aren't you guys saying anything? Because here you are, in some cases, making a living because they choose to be a professional swing dancer or blues dancer, and yet you're not at least coming to our back during this whole entire crisis with George Floyd and 10 years worth of this craziness. So, and I knew that this weekend was the big celebration of Royal Lindy Hop Day for Frankie Manning's birthday celebration, and then with Blues Geek. And to be honest with you, like, I really couldn't bring myself to participate in those functions, knowing that a lot of people that were there were being deadly quiet about what was going on, especially with the protests and stuff like that. And, you know, and that kind of like got to me a little bit, and that kind of feeling really kind of weighed on me. And that's when I really felt the weight of what I've been trying to accomplish the past few years with the cultural appropriation and getting people to understand the importance of cultural history and social context. And I don't know, like, where all of a sudden all that came from, but as you know, as a couple of people were saying, it's the whole aspect of just sitting down with that feeling and not shoving it away or hiding from it, but just embracing it, embracing that discomfort. And today feel like I'm really at a place now where I can actually channel all of that frustration to something positive. So, and that, which is what I like to do whenever I come across something that's troubling, is how can I channel it to something positive that can be educational for everyone and bring everyone along. And yeah, so the dancing for me, it was that sense of frustration and annoyance and kind of like culturally like hurtful, not personally hurtful, but just like culturally hurtful, because all of these instructors being taught around the world are teaching around the world blues and swing, and yet the stuff goes on and then it's like dead silent from a lot of them. So yeah, I had trouble with, I was struggling with that this past weekend. But I am also very appreciative of everyone who took the time to speak up from the heart instead of, just copy and pasting, the constant sayings. And, but with the whole dancing, that's why for me, I had a really hard time participating in any of the two big festivities this weekend. Just for like, I just couldn't bring myself to see a whole bunch of people smiling, laughing, and talking about how much they love jazz and blues music, and yet they're being silent on what the hell's going on right now. But yeah, so yeah, it's definitely, I'm kind of like just all mixed with emotions and somewhat lost for words and things like that. But we will get through this. Hopefully, we will get through this and come out better at the end. It's always like my peace of mind. But as far as like sitting with it, I always encourage people to sit with whatever discomfort that's going on and internalize it, and and then try to channel that energy, that negative feeling, into something positive that can benefit yourself and your community that you're involved in. So that's all I wanted to say. Just get my 2 cents in there and everything like that. So I will let someone else speak. Thank you.
Can I jump in?
Oh, yeah, my mom was.
Sorry. I've been hearing a couple of times we say, we're not doing something. I'm not doing something because we're lazy. I want to just give you a little bit of background why all of a sudden people are deciding that Black people were lazy. After the Civil War, when the Black people were freed, there was no plantations for them to be on and all of this stuff, and they were trying to get jobs and everything. And the white people decided, oh, the reason you don't want to be slaves is because you're lazy. The people who had been taking care of everybody just about, all in the South, even in the North and stuff, all of a sudden, the people who never had a day off, okay, they worked all the time, they did everything for everybody, was being told that they were lazy. And the white people said it over and over and over and over again so much that the Black people started believing them.
Yeah, changing the narrative.
They changed the narrative. You don't want to be a slave, so you must be lazy. How many people really wanted to be slaves?
It's not on my list.
I mean, now they're trying to change the history book and call us migrant workers.
Or indentured servants.
Indentured servants that came willingly from Africa, snatched from their tribes willingly on the ships, stacked bodies on top of bodies. People didn't care whether or not they died and not along the way, brought to America. And of course, we should have been extremely happy to be slaves. Some of these people were princesses and princes. You know, they had their culture and everything, and that's what was the weird part, you know? Yeah. And so all of a sudden, that's why all of a sudden they say, oh, a black person's lazy, because they didn't want to be a slave. A lot of them stayed on the plantations even after they were freed, because they were so used to taking care of the people who were there. And they stayed until they wound up working or whatever on the plantation. Now, when you think about what we can do to try to make things better, I remember several years ago, I was trying to figure out why everybody's so mean and so nasty. And of course, a lot of it's talking about Facebook and other things where people think it's okay to just blast negative things and say hurtful, mean things to people because they can't get to me. The person can't come over there. Your arm is not coming up to slap you and say, cut that out, fool, because you're doing it on this media. You need to cut all of that junk out. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. Okay? And so I was figuring out why we're so mean and people so nasty with everything. And I realized it's because they mangled the golden rule. They're doing unto others before they do to them. Instead of, you're supposed to do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. And so any of you who are watching who would say, I would gladly swap place with a black person, most of the time you wouldn't, because you know that black people weren't being treated right in the first place. And a lot of men wouldn't want to switch places with women because women still don't make enough money. You know, so basically we want to make it so we all work better together, so we could practice the golden rule of doing unto others as we would have them to do unto us. That's, you know, that would make a big difference. And if every time you meet somebody, think to yourself that I'm going to find something about this person to like. Okay, and don't go around being so sensitive that you get offended by anything and everything.
So I'm going to take this back to Odysseus talking about the dance scene. And I was working, so I knew I was not going to be able to participate in the different festivities to appreciate Frankie Manning. But the thing is that before we went down this whole track, to me, the action item is mainly, what is your area of influence, and what is something that you can identify in that area of influence that sticks out to you as like, oh, I had the privilege of this. Was that privilege something that was afforded to everyone else? And how can I make that a more possible thing? And like a lot of us are in dance, and some of us are dance organizers, or, you know, in your line of work, or you know, your church. But like, think about your areas of influence and something that you notice that you think that you had the privilege of this, but someone else might not have had that. And what can you do for that? So like, I'm someone who likes to think about education a lot. And I know that Terrace is a teacher at my old high school, which I know some of his students, and they're like, Mr. Ellis is amazing. I love Mr. Ellis. And their parents are just like, he's my favorite. But like, I had a conversation with someone the other day just talking about Black History Month, and it was an African American male, and he's like, I hate Black History Month. I'm like, dude, why? And he's like, because it's slavery. Every single time there's like Black History Month, y'all were slaves. End of story. And that was it. And I'm like, you didn't have the coloring books? And he's like, what coloring books? I'm like, I grew up with coloring books. Like in the elementary school, that my parents would buy coloring books and distribute it to everyone, and it talked about like the Black business owners and the inventors, mathematicians, scientists. And I realized, I'm like, I had a more fulfilling Black History Month than other people had. And like I was talking to him and he's like, I didn't know that was a black man that divided blood to like plasma and the blood cells, and that he caused the first blood transfusion. That's crazy. I didn't know that black people did this stuff. And so like what occurred to me just like earlier today was like, man, something that I could try to do is like put out a petition to change how Black History Month is done, because like right now, only history teachers are going, hey, we're in charge of Black History Month because everything's in the past. Whereas there are Black influencers across all the different topics. And so like if Black History Month seriously took over the entire school and it's like, we're gonna study Katherine Johnson and the mathematics, and NASA for math and science, and the different Black artists and Black literature, and Black History Month actually took over the entire education system for the school. That would be a whole different thing, and that would be something that would help change the minds and change the hearts, and that's like a foundational thing. And so I'm like, I'm not on the board of education, but this was something that I realized that I was afforded as a privilege that was not available to everyone else. And I could try to affect change that way. So to me, that's an action item. I'm not sure if y'all have like any other ideas, but like think about someplace where you've been blessed, or someplace where you were lacking blessings and you realize that later on. You're like, I wish I had this. Or, it would have been nice if this other person had that. And you work in your spheres of influence. Has anyone had like any experience with like, I had this neat opportunity. It might not have been available to everyone else.
I mean, I had a neat opportunity to help organize this tonight with your, excellent leadership and Terrace's support and Christopher's support and Jesse's support. So
you also helped organize our chat in February, which thank you for like coming up with all the worksheets and stuff.
I'm also fortunate to have y'all as part of my community. Just like, thank you for being part of it and teaching me.
Yeah. I'm reading through the questions, so excuse me. But yeah, so Carrie said like one action item, back to the original, was empathy. And like the whole thing of like working on yourself, and Nicole said that that's a dance metaphor. Yes, because I think that dance, especially how our dance works, is a metaphor on life and how you function in it and relate to others. And so yeah, like to be a great partner dancer, it is awesome to work on yourself so that you know who you are as an individual, so that you can have an honest exchange with your partner. So yeah, empathy and developing yourself, ask yourself who you are, what's important to you. And like another action item is consider your spheres of influence. Felicia said work from love.
Try to walk a mile in the other person's shoe.
Yeah. Maddie said teaching coding to those who are incarcerated.
That would be good.
That, like, if you have the access to do, like, just see where you are and try to access change. But anyone can speak and contribute, not just me.
I was gonna say, hi, Sarah, from ATL. Everybody is gonna handle this differently. Everything is very traumatic and very difficult. One thing I would like to offer this group though is I have a lot of connections and resources within the mental health community. So right now I'm working with a couple other therapists and we're getting together a list of people with sliding scales for Black and other minority, along with trans, queer, since it's also Pride Month, so that people have that resource if they want it. I've also had experience with as people are getting into therapy and mental health, how to find therapists. If anybody has questions, my inbox is open. I'm more than willing to help people get that help if they want it. Anybody can receive help. There's a lot of stigma, but if that's something you want to pursue, I'm here for you guys.
Thanks, Sarah. So Nick Williams asked, speaking of empathy and allies, how would you recommend going about that in our dance community? Honestly, with our dance community, it's like everything's a complicated issue, but I feel as if there winds up being like a group who organizes, and then like people who don't even realize there's an opportunity to help. and so like just for like even sustainability type of concept with our dance, you need to get people engaged and to have them participate in creating this stuff just for investment. And there's different levels of engagement that you can offer people, but like having the empathy and allies, like the organizers connecting with people throughout their community to have them give input and stuff, because you don't even know what you don't know. Engaging with that would probably help a lot. And you know, like teaching people, training to become teachers, like we wind up having a surprising lack of diversity in our scene. And it's almost like there's a glass ceiling within our community, but instead of the glass ceiling being, you know, for females, it's for African Americans, and it's hard to break through. And oh, Josh, are you gonna say something?
Oh no, I'm just right there with you. Especially on that point. I have lots of thoughts about that one. Keep going, please.
But yeah, this glass ceiling, like we can see it, and like and we had this discussion at Hot Jam over February, that we have this dance that is based in African American culture, but it's getting more and more divorced from, you know, the root of it. And then like the people who have like that's like our heritage, it's been passed down to us, they don't feel like they have access to it, which is sad. And so at Hot Jam, we were encouraging people to like know the history. And like honestly, if you even just get down to like why these moves exist, that is going to open up a whole lot of stuff, because like it's in our roots. And you know, tacky Annie's, like Annie was a big lady and she just went through and she's like, I want some space. And so it's like an aggressive move, and she's like, boom, make some space so I can break it down. And that is like that's like Annie making her own jam circle. Like, but just think about the history of what we do and how these things came into being, and then connect that with people, like empowering people with knowledge and empowering people with access. Like, I want to know what you think. I want you to be part of this, and actually create a dynamic community, rather than just we create this and then you receive it. Like, it's going to be a much better experience if everyone at some level is creating. We might have people who are willing to organize it, but they're not the only ones who are getting the information. But yeah, Josh, please share your thoughts on this glass ceiling of the community.
Yeah, so where's a good place to start? This glass ceiling of the community, and also like empathy and allies. jumping off of the point you were just making, Rachel, about diversity and representation in the community, a lot of events, around have been starting various diversity initiatives where you're trying to increase the attendance of African American people, Black people at your events. And I'm not sure it's always done well, in the sense that, like, there are various things that I like personally. I'm like, these things shouldn't happen if you're going to do like some sort of diversity initiative. Um, it shouldn't be a thing where like people are told necessarily about it. I personally would be happy if diversity initiatives were kind of just a thing that organizers did and literally didn't tell anyone else about it. They just made a decision themselves to go and invite some people, like completely behind the scenes. It's not really announced. There's no announcement on a website. Those people aren't asked to volunteer, and just very frank about like what you're offering, because I kind of feel like as a if you're a newer dancer coming to our community and you see all of these diversity this, and it's kind of becoming a bit of a buzzword. And I know, like, I feel like as a newer dancer, you might not trust it. Like, what are all these white people coming and telling me about how welcoming their community are? Like, really, what in the mind of a person who's unfamiliar with you, they're kind of thinking, okay, this person's telling me that their community is really welcoming, but I'm going to have my eye out looking for any moment in which they're not, because I know they're probably not. Like, it's a community of mostly white folks, right? And I think it's really important that we have like if you're looking at making your community more welcoming, the first thing is like look at how you are you welcoming in yourself. Do are you really trying to be interested in this person, maybe not as another number on your list of class attendees, but are you really trying to get to know and make this person feel a part of your community, and then are you doing that in a way where they feel like there isn't something that they have to pay back necessarily, because we want people to kind of come to the community and have the same experiences most of us had. We saw Lindy Hop and thought, oh my God, this is amazing. Or a friend brought us and they thought, oh my God, this is amazing. We want people to have the experiences of going to their first event and trying to go to every single dance and every single class and staying up all night long. We want people to have those experiences because that is them getting immersed in our, contemporary Lindy Hop culture, that we have built over the years, and that is a person getting their buy-in into the community rather than feeling like it's based on some other arbitrary condition, and I think a lot of that needs to happen first before we ever talk about, some of the other stuff, because you want to have, you want to, give the person time to get to know the community and what they want to, maybe they don't know what they want to give back for. Maybe they don't, maybe you get a person who's coming into the community who, really likes Excel spreadsheets and right. Yeah. And, eventually they participate in the community and they're having a great time and they see an opportunity to volunteer and it has something to do with running spreadsheets, and maybe they want to do that, but it shouldn't, like, especially in the case of diversity initiatives, like, it shouldn't be a thing where a person is feeling like, oh, they are expected to do this because they got something for free. Because, granted, like, I've been in some situations where it's come back to me or folks have told me, it's like, oh, that Josh guy, he thinks he's too good for his pants. He's like really, really arrogant. Like, I hope he's grateful for the position that he is in. And I'm like, well, that it's, hard to hear, someone in the community, like, thinks that way about me, but like, I know what I'm about. And, that opinion is not an opinion that I'm trying to pay any heed to. But I've seen it happen time and time again. Like, black person is a part of the community, and they're having a good time, and then someone else out there is like frustrated maybe with their progress in the community, or they say something that makes that person feel like the black person feel like they all of a sudden need to diminish themselves in order to fit in, but when you create a environment where a person feels like they have to diminish themselves in order to fit in, that in this Lindy Hop community, we got to understand that at this point it's a mostly white community. And so you're literally asking that person to diminish themselves to fit in with what is seen as appropriate for everyone else, and that is white folks. And the reality is, it's like this, me as a black person, like I'm here to be a black person doing a black dance, not be a black person trying to do black dance through the eyes of white people. So, that glass ceiling has a lot to do with, are you actually welcoming people to your community with no strings attached? And then when you have a person comes into your community and they are lifting themselves up and lifting up other people around them, and just really taking to the dance, don't go and squash that person. Don't go and do that, because that is what makes people leave. When me, Latasha, Tina Morales, Armstrong, and Latasha Barnes, myself, and Taryn Newborn, we were kind of for all intents and purposes, me and Latasha are co-founders of Hella Black Lindy Hop, but it was that group of people, we kind of all put our heads together, and that's what brought Hella Black Lindy Hop into being. But after that, I just started to get messages from people I didn't even know, black folks, telling me, oh man, I saw this, I left the community 10 years ago, 15 years ago, because I was just sick of the shit, but like seeing, y'all out there, that makes me want to come back, and that was, on one hand, it was like life affirming. I felt really happy. On the other hand, I was like, damn, like I knew that a lot of folks in the community weren't with it and didn't get it, but like just counting the numbers of people who reached out to me and told me why they left, like it made me really angry. I've often hear a lot of times, especially people who've been in the community a long time, will say, well, like, oh, wait, back then, like, there were white dancers who were at the Savoy too, and they were invited, and so like, basically using that argument to say that, oh, white people are allowed to do Lindy Hop too. And my response to that argument is that back then the Savoy was a black space, and the spaces that we are in now aren't necessarily that, rarely that, and it's a different situation when a culture in its own, a culture that has a cultural activity, and the household that activity is done in by the people who created it. It's a different experience when you welcome someone else. I think what we call it now is, like you say, invite it to the barbecue or invite it to the cookout. It's a different experience when this is your space, and someone else wants to be a part of that space. And because, in the case of Lindy Hop, like this is a dance that was meant to bring people together, it's very anti-Lindy Hop to say no. But it's also very anti-Lindy Hop to take the blackness out of it. And that has happened. Absolutely. So that's what I have to say about the glass ceiling.
Yeah. Yeah, those are very profound thoughts. And what I got as like takeaway points, like how genuine are we when we're greeting new people? Because I've definitely seen people come into our community and it's like, great, you're new. Do all of this stuff. Like you just slam the new people with all this stuff because like you're excited, you're new. You do all of the things. Oh, guess what? You're organizing that weekend. That's going to happen in like 3 months. Yep. That's not anything close to fair, but like we need to genuinely welcome people and give them time to develop and luxuriate in this space, in this dance. Um, and also the question is, how accessible is the leadership? Like, are people able to just go and talk to you and like share ideas? Are you receptive to the feedback or ideas? Or are you saying things can only generate from you or from your board? So how well are you listening? How curious are you? And all that type of stuff. So yeah.
I got a question privately where I was asked, what kind of expectations makes you feel like you have to diminish yourself? Oh man. One situation not too long ago in my own home scene, there was a dancer who is like one of the scene leaders and studio owners out here. And the first time I heard that Josh guy, he's really arrogant, he's a show off, actually happened at Lindy Focus. I was in the bathroom and I overheard some guys talking. It's like, oh, that Josh guy, he's always in the jam circles. You know, he's just a show off, blah, 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 blah. And that was really hurtful because a few things, you know, for me, like coming from a hip hop background, like jam circles, one, aren't about showing off, they're about showing up. Two, I would go ahead and go out on a limb and say that jam circles, we're talking more and more now today, and this is good, how jam circles are for everyone. But I think maybe traditionally, in the sense of the way that we do them, they were done in Lindy Hop, and also in some other dance forms. You know, jam circles, they were for people to put their best stuff forward. You know, they were for the best to put their best stuff forward. You know, and it's also all of the above. It's everything else. It was a protective circle. It was a permissive circle. It was for you to take up space and to show everyone else just how damn good you were. You know, and they were so. I often think a lot about voguing and ball culture when I think about jam circles, because that's all about taking up space for people who were denied their identities and denied their space. And so it's really, it's analogous for me. But this situation where I felt like I was literally told to diminish myself, and I had participated in the jam circle. I went in once by myself. I went in another time with another person. A bunch of other people go in, and at one point the circle just dies. And the circle died because people are thinking jam circles are only for the really cool people, blah 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 blah. And so it got awkward. When it got awkward, I went in again to fill the space. And my intention in that moment was to go in and then to also include some other people. But the person who, you know, is on this similar level of leadership in the community as me, grabbed my shoulder like hard with a claw. And it's like, you need to let someone else go in. And I was really frustrated at that because, of course, like it was a misunderstanding in the brink of a moment. You know, he's thinking, it's like, oh, Josh, you're trying to show off. You're trying to do this thing. You're trying to do that thing. But the problem with that is that when you tell, especially if you're a white person, if a white person goes and tells like a black person, it's like, look, I think you're showing off too much. Like you need to like tone it down. For one thing, you know, on one hand, they're acknowledging your skill, and on the other hand, or your talent or your presence, and on the other hand, they're also saying that you know, that's too much or that's inappropriate for this moment. And so that, particularly on the white identity to Black identity, has its own issue. And then in that situation, I kind of just left and it's like, yeah, but you know, it's not really in the culture of jams. You know, the jam went in, like was empty, and I was going to go in and fill the space, right? But he was assuming that I was just trying to take the space from others. You know, and that to me pointed more towards a misunderstanding of Black culture, and it's particularly Black dance culture, than it did necessarily what that situation is, you know? As far as like diminish myself, I will also say that if you are a Black person, you know, I'm throwing out this number as an arbitrary number, so I'm intentionally hyperbolizing because I don't know what the actual number is, but I'm willing to bet, you know, 90% of our community is not Black. So if you're a Black person and you want to have a dance partner, 90% of the people, unless you make a specific effort in yourself, and that means overcoming financial difficulties, overcoming geographic difficulties, and sometimes also generational difficulties. If you want to dance with another, you have to make a specific effort to dance with another Black partner. You know, a lot of us, you know, are kind of spread out, few and far between over many scenes. So if you know, most of the people that you end up coming into contact with are going to be not Black. And if you want to go and work with a dance partner and they end up being not Black, you know, and you find a moment where you're like, you know, I need to talk with my partner on some Black stuff. If they're not with it, then there goes that partnership. There goes your opportunity to work happily. There goes your opportunity to practice and dance happily with that person. Like, it's just gone, you know? And so that kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It kind of gradually, you know, pushes a person towards the zone of like, let me tone down my Blackness again, so I can fit in this community, you know, so I can get, you know, I can go to that next opportunity, so I can go to that next dance weekend happily and not have to explain myself or explain where I'm coming from in my own experience to these other people who don't know, you know, and maybe also to some other people who are well-meaning, but I still have to end up explaining myself, you know, because when you every moment that a Black person has to explain where they're coming from, they're also making themselves vulnerable to a person dismissing that experience entirely, you know, and that's what makes people leave, you know, because meanwhile, you know, you're doing this Black dance and you have to see all of these other non-Black people out there like living it up, getting their yokes, getting their swing outs, doing their aerials, doing all of their stuff. And you couldn't even have a conversation that would give you were a white person wasn't even able to have a conversation and separate and recognize their position and do that work on their fragility to give you the sense of trust, and then also that person the sense of trust that you can even do an aerial with them, that you can even do a swing out together. So, you know, those are two situations, both like if you're working with a non-white partner. For me personally, you know, 2017 and on, I was like, that's it. Like, I'm like, the partners that I have that I've worked with that aren't white have been, at this point for myself now, I've done a little work with Gabby Cook. Effectively, like, people that I identify as my people who have been there from the very beginning and have been unshaking and unwavering, those are the folks that I will work with. But I'm not trying to pursue any sort of necessarily like new connections with non-white people in the community, because it's been more life stealing than it has been giving or affirming. And I just I'm not interested in that.
Yeah.
So, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Odysseus.
Go ahead, Josh. You're still talking. I'm sorry. I thought you were done. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna segue to you based on your message.
Yeah, because you said something that was that was great with that. Like with my sense, like I don't compete much or do a lot of choreo pieces for my own perceived perception of how they're run and stuff like that. But my big thing is just since I'm more on the side of trying to doing whatever I can to try to help spread like the culture, historical information and stuff like that, along with tons of other people. Yeah, it's just a constant, like almost purposeful attempt of not wanting to understand a lot of things that Joshua was talking about, you know, like that cultural understanding of a jam circle, you know, of whether or not to come and bring your best stuff or just to have fun, even if you don't have like the best moves in the world, and to have fun, and how just like that simple action, because of our country's history, especially between Black and white folks, of just like the slightest word carries so much different weight to it, you know, like when hearing it. So when that individual put his hand on Josh's shoulder like that and said those things, that was like, you know, I'm sure, like, you know, not to speak for him completely, but in the back of his mind of like, yo, that's some kind of not cool thing of what you just did there. But him having a sense of mind, well, you know, let me not, you know, go overboard with it and you know, make you know, it caused like too much big of a scene. And that's something that we always have to constantly check about ourselves, which sometimes I don't like to do, but I even wind up doing it myself. And it gets into this a very awkward situation of, okay, they don't know this, but they need to know this, because if they don't, then they're going to continue doing it. But if I bring it up, then all of a sudden I'm that guy that's bringing up a very uncomfortable issue about, you know, race or identity and things like that. And it is, at least for me, I can't speak for anybody else, at least for me, that is a constant like back and forth like struggle. And when you see, no matter if you go to like a Lindy Focus or Camp Jitterbug or any blues event like around the country and world, you know, constantly see these things, and you just want to just, you know, yell at everyone, just say, just stop dancing, everyone, just stop dancing. And, you know, let's just take a deep breath and rewind and kind of approach this in a different way, in a different light that's more respectable or respectful of the culture to which you're doing this dance from. So I've had plenty of those moments, especially when I went to Spain for Drag the Blues. But it's definitely something that irks me a lot, seeing that, and especially this notion of like there's only one way to teach this dance, and which is, but it's just bothersome to the highest extent, because there is no perfect way to teach swing dancing and blues dancing. You know, like it's a creative art form for a reason, and understanding understanding how Black people express themselves through music, through dance, like getting into jam circles, which is a African cultural, you know, trait, all the way going back to tribal dance circles. And just when you watch those, even like modern day, and just see like how free, you know, people just get in there and just do whatever, like that's what it's really about. And there's no perfect way to do it. And it just bugs me personally whenever I see, like, you know, instructors talk about, oh, if you want to do the perfect swing out, or if you want to do swing out, it has to be like this, or it has to look like this. And it's like, well, no, it doesn't, because no one made that rule up. You know, like I read Frankie Manny's book. Nowhere did he say like this is how you have to do a swing out or anything else. Same thing for what Josh was saying with the Tacky Annie. You know, like everything has like a connection to it, and it's and that's the thing that a lot of dancers in the scene really have a hard time grasping, and don't want to put the work in trying to understand, which for me is a very frustrating thing. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what you said there, Josh. So, you know, my apologies if I got any of that information wrong, but.
You have a Facebook event coming up, right?
Oh, yes. I do. It's I titled it called like The More You Know. I wanted to do that whole 1980s, 90s reading rainbow. I mean, kind of situation, because I'm a big nerd like that. And what it's about is it's something that I've been really kind of thinking about for over 2 years, because I've always, every time I try to talk to instructors, whether they be white, Black, Asian, or everything else in between, about trying to include history and social context throughout dance classes, I will always get a series of like the top 10 hits of reasons of why not to, or why it's hard to do that. So after doing research myself, just kind of get a better understanding of just, basic things, I started to put into practice how to include social context and history with all of the fears that people would tell me and fears that I have within myself. And I think I have a good kind of like foundation for people to go about approaching it in a respectful, appreciative way. And what I really focus on is what I'm focusing on is not so much saying, no, you're saying this wrong, but more in the sense of like, I see where you're going with this process, with this thought process, but maybe take out this word and place with something else because it's coming off as like, it's coming off as dismissive, or like, you know what, that last phrasing was great. Just maybe change the first phrasing a little bit to kind of match the second half. So it's a positive, motivating thing to give confidence to instructors of all skin color, no matter where they are in the world, the confidence and the tools to start putting into practice. Just like the gentleman was saying earlier, once you put it into practice, it becomes normal. Like things to think about as far as like when they're class planning, of like always thinking, can I include history and social context throughout this class? Where are those opportunities, and how am I going to say it, and how can I say it in my own voice and my own words, that how I understand it. And because ever since I've been doing that, I've realized that the students have been a lot more willing to listen to what I had to say, because I'm talking from the heart and I'm not talking from the head. So I'm approaching it with a lot more sympathy and empathy with it. And I'm also not afraid to say, I don't know, whenever I'm approached with a question that I'm asked. I just say, I don't know. And a lot of instructors, I feel, have a hard time saying, I don't know, whenever they are asked a question, especially about social context and history. And also I want them to get a good sense and understanding that it's okay to not be perfect with the information that you give. It's about how respectful you can be while giving that information. One of the stories that I'm going to use in the workshop is I was teaching a drop-in swing class up in Harlem for a live band night with the Harlem Renaissance. And this was near the beginning when I was trying to figure everything out and stumbling along the way. After class, these two older Black people came up to me and they asked me, not asked me, but they came up to me and they said, thank you for talking about the past. Thank you for acknowledging it. They didn't say, you young person, what do you know? You weren't alive back then. Or they didn't come up to me and say, oh, you got every single piece of information wrong. They didn't say that. They just said, thank you for acknowledging and talking about the past, because not everybody does. And maybe I misinterpret that, but I saw that as it wasn't about, once again, being perfect about what I say. It's about how respectful I can be while saying it, and only talk about what I know. So that's, and ever since then, that's what I've always done. And I think that if we as instructors really put that into practice and make that normalized, then we aren't going to have a hard time finding moments to include one or two things here, one or two sentences here, or one or two sentences there, and make the context that you're talking about relevant to what you're actually teaching. So instead of just throwing everything at the end, or throwing everything at the beginning, or trying to fit it somewhere awkwardly in the middle, if you just take the time and go, you know what, I see something here, I'm gonna throw in a little something here, and I'm gonna throw in a little something there. And then the students aren't going to think that they're getting a lecture. They're like, oh, cool, there's context with what I'm actually doing, like social, like cultural context. and to find that balance is the main thing, is to find that balance of teaching technically and also teaching from a cultural perspective. So so that's what the workshop is about. Like I said, I've been thinking about it for many, many years, and been doing tons of research, not so much like on how to teach it, but just like understanding of like more of the social aspect of things. And I talk about other stuff as well, but the main crux of the exercise is actually having the participants try to answer questions that I came up with and try to respond to them how they would explain it to their students. So it's a very active workshop where we'll be breaking people up into groups. You know, we're going to be talking about stuff. So it's an interactive thing with not just me talking all the time. And that's going to be on the 13th and 14th of June, which is a Saturday and Sunday for North America. So Canada, America, Mexico, and the Caribbeans. And then I have it on the 20th and 21st, which is for like Africa, Europe, Eastern Europe, Middle East, and Asia and Oceania countries. So, because I want this to truly be a global workshop and not just strictly to like North American instructors. So we'll see how it goes. Yay! But I really think that this is a good first step and just one of many possible solutions. So this isn't the end all be all, but at least it is something. And another reason I came up with this because I'm just tired of always hearing the excuses of why not to give the extra attention to the history and culture as you do to the movements and the music, you know? So, you know, it's just kind of like, I'm the kind of person like, if there's an obstacle, I get around it. I'm an actor. I'm faced with tons of obstacles every freaking day. So it's like, how can I get around this solution? And that's how I'm approaching this, but in a way that is motivating, because we all know that once you constantly berate people and beat people down mentally, then they just hide into their corner. They get very defensive. So to prevent that, I'm trying this approach, and hopefully this approach will yield some results for down the future, later down the road. But I get into much more of that into the actual workshop itself. So don't want to, get too much into it. But that's my my teacher training workshop that's going to happen in a couple of weeks. So hopefully everyone here will be able to attend. It's 2 days, same materials on the same day. So just pick whatever day you feel like you can join. And it's going to be a good time with music break in between and dancing in between. So yeah. Go ahead, Josh, you have something?
Yeah, I had another question here about what changes I would like to see in our scene. And I'm going to say a few things. The first is, I can't speak for every Black person when I say these things, but I'm going to try and hit some common themes that I see happen. And then the second thing I want to say is I especially cannot speak for Black women because that is not my experience. Starting with that point, one of my friends that I very much respect, his name is Aaron Lewis. We had a conversation, and he just said it like this. He was like, even within this dance, like it's very much have been, even among Black folks, it's very much has been the men who get talked about, whose names get remembered from the videos, all of that. And, we are really doing both the dance, the history, the culture, and ourselves a disservice by not uplifting Black women's voices. It's just like we're failing them, like the most. One, uplift Black voices, but even most importantly, uplift Black women and Black femme identifying voices, and Black queer voices. Two, as changes in our scene, if you're a white person, especially if you're a white person who's been doing this dance for a very long time, and you're a teacher and you have an opportunity to teach Black people, do not, and I repeat, do not come at them with any "your movement isn't Lindy Hop enough" kind of stuff. Do not come at them with like, "Oh, your movement is too hip hop or too that." First of all, you're wrong, and here's why you're wrong. And especially if you're a teacher, you should know why you're wrong, because Lindy Hop is a container. It's a vehicle. It's a vehicle that carries lived experiences. So the dancing done by an Afro-Latino person is going to look vastly different than the dancing done by a Jewish person. That's going to look vastly different than a person who comes from the Caribbean, because you're meant to bring your lived experience to this dance. The dance should not look, in my opinion, exactly the same as it did back in like the early 1900s, right? I think the dance, it should absolutely look very similar. We should know what our traditions and our roots are, but the dance should reflect our current day, right? And the also the political issues that are going around, because arts and politics are connected, right? Another point. So that point, just stop telling Black folks that they don't. Another point to support that one. Also talking with my friend Aaron, and another dancer out here in Seattle, a woman named Miranda Longacre. She was talking to us about teaching, and we ended up coming down to the point of like, okay, we as dancers didn't get to the point that we are in now, acting as if we knew anything. We only got here because we didn't know everything. So if you're a teacher and you're teaching, we should definitely be teaching from the point of discovery, as opposed to from the point of like, oh, let me break this down and teach you exactly how to do this thing. It's like, no, we should be teaching from that point of discovery, right? And those are my first things. And then also what I said earlier about if you're going to have some sort of diversity initiative, like let that just be a quiet thing that's behind the scenes. The only people who should know about your diversity initiative is you and the people who received it, right? Or sorry, not even received it, the people who were welcomed by you to be in this community. I think another thing would be like, I remember when I started dancing, people used to tell me how, at least out here in Seattle, they would go, like, folks would go to parks and hand out flyers, and that's how you got people to come to your community. And I was like, does that still happen? Like, I would hope so, because that means you could, you could go to into communities that aren't of folks who aren't currently in your community, and you can welcome them in, and on one point I will say, like, if you don't have some Black folks going there with you, you're going to have a harder time of it, because people ain't going to trust you anyway. They're going to be like, who are these people and why are they in our neighborhood trying to get me to do this thing, so like we got to work with each other. We got to welcome people directly. And then after that, it's personal responsibility for every member of like, if you do this dance and you call yourself a swing dancer, a Lindy Hopper, or part of the Lindy Hop community, you have a personal responsibility, especially in so actually I'm gonna retract that, because you should be doing this no matter what the time is, or no matter what events have been going on. But if you do this dance, every single step that you put on your floor in the name of doing swing dance, Lindy Hop, it should be done with the recognition that you're doing you're benefiting from Black culture. You should be done with the recognition that the people, the dance as it exists today does not reflect the ideas of the Black community, not in the way it used to and not in the way it is now. And oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was this point? This is my important one. Bear with me just a second. Oh, sorry, I got going and then I lost it.
You started with talking about personal responsibility. And
oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel. We each have a personal responsibility to ask ourselves before we're worried about how welcoming our community is. We also have to ask, how welcoming am I? If you, I feel like if you're, in your own positionality as well, like understanding what identity do you hold? How will people receive you? When you communicate based on your identity, how might they take it in? And asking yourself, okay, have I done the work? If I'm going to go out and be welcoming, what do I actually believe? And not just like, what do I believe? And you have some beliefs, you're like, oh, these are the good things. These are the things that I believe in because they're good. But what do I believe when my beliefs are tested? What are the things that I have thought or said in the past when I found it hard to hear out a Black person, or difficult to listen to a person of X marginalized identity? Because that tells you, and also Black people / people of X marginalized identity, where you are in your process and what you really believe and how that's going to come back on them, So like there's that personal responsibility, and those are some of the main things I would like to see change in the community.
So, Odysseus, you're about to say something?
Oh, just real quickly to piggyback on that of what Josh said about a responsibility especially when he was talking about the glass ceiling of like hiring people of color for the dance scene. Yes, I agree. Like if you're going to have the initiative of being diverse, like it doesn't need to be advertised as much as it has been advertised. It really just needs to be something that you as an organizer or if you're a DJ coordinator, you just do without thinking about it. You're just like, you know what? I want to be diverse, so I'm going to reach out to these individuals or ask about certain individuals that I'm thinking about hiring and just hire them. That's it. You don't need to make a big show of it. And also too is when it comes to that everyone has something different to bring to the table. And it goes back to what Josh and I were alluding to of there's no perfect way of doing this dance, and it's always going to be different. And with that difference is we're going to bring our own individual understanding of our understanding of the music and the dance and how we interpret it. And it's neither right or wrong, and to really be a champion of that. So they don't have to go win all of these awards and competitions around the world. But if they approach you and say, hey, I would like to teach here and here's me dancing, it really shouldn't matter like if they win a whole bunch of competitions or if they've gone to every single dance event around the world. It's just that they're showing you that they have like the aptitude for it. And then you can sit down and still vet them, which I think is a very important thing that I think organizers should do more of, is vetting people. So in that way they're not stuck in a precarious situation. But when you only stick to hiring the same group of people over and over again, as great as they are, we're kind of saying that this is the only way, this is the way how to do this dance. And it just goes directly in conflict with what the culture is really about, which is more of our lived experience. My lived experience is going to be different from Joshua. It's going to be different from Kenneth, but that still doesn't mean that it's not valid or it's not pertinent. It doesn't help us and want to share what we know with everybody else. So I just want to just kind of piggyback on that a little bit.
Okay, so thank you all for sharing these super profound thoughts. I'm going to start to wrap this up because this has gone a long time and it was wonderful. But to just surmise the different thoughts that we've had, first of all, be genuine. And, how are you going to be a genuine person? How are you going to have genuine encounters with these dances? And, when you're genuine, then you're going to inherently just welcome people and make people want to stay in that space. My brother talked about practicing empathy, and yeah, it's a practice. You have to continuously be empathetic. And so consider other people's perspectives, and that requires you to be curious. And Odysseus talked about teaching not based on like black and white fact, this is the only way, but teaching from a perspective of exploring. Okay, so be empathetic, and that's going to help our scene grow inherently. And be willing to explore and like seek out people in new places. And sorry, I went into Star Trek mode because that was my upbringing. But seek out people who might have a different perspective. That's going to make our dance better anyways, because, one message is going to resonate better with people than another. You might be saying basically the same thing, but the wording's different. Or that person, the way that they approach the dance could better suit someone else's body. But be curious, diversify, invite people who are different from you to this dance, and it's going to make our scene stronger and better. And this dance inherently, it's about people, well, in my opinion, it's about people bringing the best versions of themselves. So that means a lot of self-work, and that's you being honest with yourself. And so you're going to have to like acknowledge the history of this dance, and you're going to have to get to know who you are, what you believe in, how are you interacting with this person, especially if it's a partner dance. The best dances I have are when I can trust the person, and I can only trust a person if I know myself and trust myself. So those are some things. And then to continue shaping our community, we need to focus on uplifting people. So we're going to uplift our community members, our Black voices, our women, our Black women, our queer voices, and really look at opportunities to develop people. We are teachers, okay? You're supposed to be mentoring people and developing them and just hoping for them to continue in this exploration of themselves and life and just love it and luxuriate in it. So, yeah. So be curious, show empathy, share love, go out and invite people who are not like you to come teach or to just even be involved. And Joshua's right. We used to hand out flyers and go around to the communities. Go back to handing out flyers. Don't try to like pump the same pump that's gone dry. Like, people will come. I'm just going to post the same ad. No, invite people. And oh yes, and the big one that it's definitely people have experienced, or at least I've experienced. Don't minimize people / like their individual take on this. You are offering information, and like, I can talk about my thing with teaching is that I try to teach people how to use their bodies so that they work well, but I do not try to teach people how to style it or how to interpret what they are receiving from the music, but just teach people how to move their bodies well, and just like so that they don't get hurt or at least find the beat. But yeah, allow people to explore how they are interpreting this music. This is an ever evolving art form. Okay? We don't look exactly like the people did back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and we're not supposed to. Our lives have changed. The world has changed. And as true artists, we are reflecting what the world is. So let's encourage that exploration. But once again, thank you all for joining us. This was like a very short notice chat, but I really, really appreciate your presence and all your contributions, your questions in the chat, all the people who chatted with us and shared their thoughts and experiences. And so thank you all for being engaged community members and really taking the time to invest in other people. Like, communities come together and we're dynamic. And yeah, this gives us great hope for things becoming better, because we know that we can always be better. Yeah. All right, but thank you all so much. Have a great night.
We do the hot jam thank you.
Oh, hot jam thank you.
Yeah, turn on your video if you feel like it. Wave your hands at each other. This is also thank you in sign language, not to appropriate sign language.
Yeah, no, this did not originate with hot jam.
Yeah, and thank you to everyone for showing up and for listening and participating and speaking. Thank you, Rachel, for leading this discussion and for inviting your brother. We're gonna share the links, and we're going to share this recording with everyone. It'll take a little bit of time because I'm job hunting, so it's gonna take me a few minutes to compile all that information. But I will make sure that it's in that event. And if you don't see it, please hold me accountable and feel free to message me, and I will happily make sure that it happens. So.
Isn't this applause?
Yeah, this is applause and sign language.
Okay,
thank you.
sorry. I got confused for a second.
I totally messed that up. This is applause.
Thank you. It's been a long day.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Sorry I came late. I was coming straight off of school.
You know, everyone comes when they can come, and you showing up is so so good, and we're so grateful for it. Yeah. So have a good night, everyone. Please stay safe. Remember to donate to causes. We listed a bunch of stuff, but you can also send a few bucks to someone if you want to buy them coffee, especially the people who spoke here tonight. Feel free to ask them for their PayPal or Venmo. A lot of them have Patreons. A lot of them, like, I'm sure you can figure it out. We're all adults who live in the technology age. And let us know if you have any questions or concerns after. So have a good night.
Oh, and if any of y'all are interested in more of my brother's work, he shared the links, and Carrie has a collection of links, but his name is Barrett Holmes Pittner. He has a lot of articles that he's printed on race and culture and his current research on ethnocide. You can also look up his organization, the Sustainable Culture Lab. So, yes. Thank you. Good night.